I can confirm that the webcast has started.
Well, good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of Surrey County Council that's being held remotely. Today marks the last council meeting of 2020 and the last of our meetings at County Hall in Kingston. Members, may I remind you that this meeting is being webcast live and is open to the public, although I have the right to suspend filming if the need arises. Some meeting etiquette reminders as always. Please only turn on your camera and microphone when you wish to speak. If your broadband connection is poor and is affecting the quality of the call, then please consider turning off your camera and only using the microphone to speak. Please use the raise the hand position if you wish to speak, and once you've spoken, please remember to press the button to lower your hand. Alternatively, if you don't have that button, would you please use the chat function to indicate that you wish to speak, as a member of our services are there to give you a thumbs up to your request. The meeting will be webcast and recorded by Democratic Services as ever, and will be minuted by the committee manager. In the event of disruption by live broadcast due to technical issues, the meeting will be suspended until the issue is resolved. Voting is to be agreed by general assent, and a roll call will be issued where there is dissent, and in the event a recorded vote is requested. So, I will now move on to the first item of the agenda. Apologies for absence. Apologies for absence I've received from Mr. Mansfield and Mr. Elwood. Are there any other apologies? Thank you. And I particularly want to welcome Mr. Kemp to the meeting. Colin, we all wish you all the very best. Item 2, minutes. May I sign the minutes of the council held on 13th October 2020 as a correct record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests, significant personal interests, or prejudicial interests that members wish to make at this point? Dr. Povey.
Thank you, Chairman. I declare an interest as a trustee of Surrey Hills Society.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, members. Item 4, my chairman's announcements are, as always, can be found in full in the agenda. However, on this occasion, I would like to ask Chris Botton to say a few words regarding our former colleague, John Orrick, who sadly passed away last month. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, for your courtesy, and thank you, members, for listening. I'm speaking with the blessing of John's widow. John lost his very lengthy and strenuous battle with leukemia last month. He served as County Councillor for the division that I currently serve for the previous 2 terms, and was the most dedicated, kind, generous and hard-working County Councillor. When I spoke to his widow about whether I should attend his funeral this morning or whether I should come to County Council, she was very clear that John would have insisted that I did my civic duty and came here, and that is the mark of the man. He was ferociously dedicated to making the County Council work for his residents. He was a man who thoroughly respected both the traditions and the opportunities that being a County Councillor represented to serve his residents, and he was a man of utmost integrity. It's my privilege to be able to speak for him today, and I'm very grateful, Chairman, for the opportunity to do so. He will be very severely missed, and he is a role model, whatever political party you serve, for how to be a local councillor. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. May his dear soul rest in peace. Item 5, Leader's Statement. I call Tim Oliver, the Leader of the Council, to make his statement, and may I remind you, members, that you can make comments as well as ask questions on the Leader's Statement, and the Leader will respond at the end. Leader, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members, we come together still virtually, still in the grip of a pandemic that began almost 10 months ago, but with light visible at the end of the tunnel. Without question, this has been a year like no other. It has undoubtedly been challenging for everyone in different ways: restrictions on freedoms, fundamental changes to our normal way of life, a lack of social contact. For some, it's been even more challenging, facing financial uncertainty, job insecurity, serious health problems, and of course, the loss of friends and family. The impact will be long lasting, and we will have a big role to play in helping people, communities, and the county recover. Throughout the multitude of challenges this year has thrown at us, Surrey has come together. Our local communities have stepped up and shown remarkable generosity and care for their neighbours and those less fortunate. Partners across Surrey have come together as the Local Resilience Forum to guide the county through these uncharted waters. The County Council, the police, health services, Surrey Fire and Rescue, the district and boroughs, the voluntary community and faith sector, universities and schools, and thousands of volunteers. Surrey's public health team has shown remarkable leadership right from the moment we had the first contracted case in February, through to being identified as one of the national leaders ahead of the test and trace rollout, and now to that daily scrutiny of local data to ensure the right decisions are made for our communities here in Surrey. As a council, we are well integrated with our NHS partners in the county, and we will stand with them and support them as they embark on the Herculean task of mass vaccination rollout, which started at 6:30 this morning. I look forward to taking up that vaccine myself in due course in the new year. And in the meantime, we must all play our part in helping dispel lies, conspiracy theories and misinformation to ensure our communities are protected and we can all return to our normal way of life as soon as possible. Mr. Chairman, I also want to take this opportunity to recognise the work of our staff throughout this most difficult of years, as well as the remarkable work undertaken by our NHS colleagues nationally. We must pay tribute to our care workers here in Surrey. They have always had a huge dedication to their work, but it's been highlighted this year even more so. Selfless, caring, exceptionally skilled, these people really are the best of us. Our key workers across the council have been incredible throughout the pandemic, working throughout lockdowns, redesigning services quickly to make them COVID secure and available to residents, and many volunteering to be redeployed in different roles wherever needed, be it handling calls on the community helpline to packing boxes or visiting our most vulnerable. I hope they find time this Christmas, at the very least, to switch off and reflect on the magnificent effort they've put in this year. Mr. Chairman, even though our primary focus throughout 2020 has been responding to this pandemic and protecting our residents, we have pressed ahead as a council in not only continuing to deliver the services our residents rely on, but working hard to make sure they are better than ever. We started this year with ambitious plans for the organisation and for Surrey as a place, and we've continued to pursue those ambitions throughout the year. This has only been possible because our finances have remained strong, thanks to our hard work over the last couple of years. That has meant we have been able to provide the financial bedrock for the Local Resilience Forum and to continue to deliver services to residents with a balanced budget for 2021. As you have already mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we are moving the council offices back into the county, having secured an offer for the building and delivering on my pledge when I became leader to get our staff closer to the residents and communities we serve. We've progressed with our transformation of children's services, which Ofsted have confirmed as having substantially improved. Further visits are planned next year, which we're looking forward to with fresh impetus, with the arrival of Rachel Wardell as our new Executive Director, who I am sure will lead us to be even better. We have progressed the Making Surrey Safer plan, bringing Surrey Fire and Rescue Service up to modern standards, working to prevent more incidents and respond to the challenges of today's society. Our first fire engine response times for critical emergencies is averaging 7 minutes and 55 seconds, well within the 10-minute response target. We have also focused on the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda, particularly with our staff, to ensure that we listen to the voices of people who have previously not been heard and putting this at the heart of our policy making. Another thing I'm particularly proud of this year is the Council's climate change strategy, which we published in the summer. That will guide our work on tackling the climate emergency, which I will go into in more detail shortly. I very much hope that all of our partners, including the district and borough councils, will join us in promoting that strategy. We have continued with our ambitious investment in our residents and our future, acting on the promises we made back in January when we announced our capital investment strategy, and are progressing a number of initiatives, including Your Fund Surrey, with £100 million to strengthen communities and give residents more power and influence, tackling climate change and green infrastructure to deliver a greener and more sustainable future, schools and SEND provision by increasing school places, ensuring our children can overcome this year's disruption and get the best possible start in life closer to home, reducing the need to travel long distances. Highways investment of over £100 million this year on maintenance and improvements, as well as promoting active travel to make getting around the county smoother. Flood alleviation schemes across the county to protect tens of thousands of homes and businesses from further disaster and give future security and peace of mind. Extra care sites to ensure our elderly residents can keep independence for longer and grow old safely and with dignity. Our ambitions for Surrey as a place have not dimmed. We're looking to the future and continuing that transformation as we head into 2021. As I've already mentioned, Mr. Chairman, our collective hard work and dedication over the last 2 years to get our finances in order means we've been able to cope with the challenges that have come from this year and are well placed going into an uncertain future. A few years ago, a major unforeseen issue such as COVID may well have pushed Surrey to the brink, but thanks to the transformation undertaken in this organisation, we can continue to provide services and a better future for our residents. Our ambitious programme of investing in our communities will continue and has become even more important in ensuring they can thrive over the coming years of recovery. I believe our residents can trust Surrey County Council to guide the county through these challenging times and deliver a brighter future. We are now in our budget setting period. The draft budget went to Cabinet in November, and we're asking residents for their thoughts and priorities via a survey to engage them in the process and be wholly transparent as to how their money is spent. We will continue to transform our services to ensure every efficiency can be made and every service is delivering the very best value for money. It will be essential to continue that sound financial management in an uncertain but undoubtedly challenging medium-term future as the country gets to grips with the longer-term effects of COVID and its economic impact, and whilst we need to increase council tax to fund our services, we will ensure that the increase is at the minimum level we require and well below the 5% we would be allowed to levy. This is not the time to add even more financial pressure on our residents. As it always has been, the majority of our spending goes on protecting our most vulnerable residents, working to improve their quality of life and reduce inequality. We spend more than £1 million every single day on adult social care and over £500,000 on children's services. Most of our residents won't necessarily experience these services, but it is our duty to ensure our most vulnerable are looked after, and we will continue to do that while pressing government on sustainable ways to deliver that care. Of course, we will continue to fund day-to-day spending on highways and transport, libraries, schools, waste disposal, community protection, including the fire service, as well as the important governance and so-called back office functions that help ensure services are delivered. The work of the Council over the coming year will be guided by our 4 key pillars of focus that every part of the organisation will be working to achieve. These are growing a sustainable economy so everyone can benefit. This focus is particularly critical as our county recovers from COVID. Surrey's Community Impact Assessment Report highlights how the economic impact has been felt most acutely in those areas with a higher reliance on certain industries, such as aviation. The number of people claiming universal credit or job seekers allowance has increased by over 300% in some areas of Surrey. We must support people and businesses across Surrey to grow again and reprioritise infrastructure plans to adapt to changing needs and demands. If we can deliver the right conditions for our industry to grow, better connectivity, infrastructure, a better and more affordable place to live and work, the possibilities for our county are endless. We are an ambitious organisation for an ambitious county. We are making Surrey a county that is fit for the future. The second priority area is tackling health inequality. As already touched upon, we have a close and positive relationship with our NHS partners, particularly through Surrey Heartlands. We will continue our driving ambition to reduce health inequalities, particularly in life expectancy, and make sure that nobody is left behind. We can do this by accelerating health and social care integration to reduce demand on services while improving health outcomes for residents, as well as supporting a strong economy. We must also increase our focus on addressing mental health. This year has brought into sharp focus the fragility of mental health for many of our residents, and this is a key area of work for our Health and Wellbeing Board. We will build on the foundations of the recent Mental Health Summit that the county convened, and with Surrey Heartlands, establish a Mental Health Oversight Board to ensure that we all engage partners in driving our prevention and early intervention agenda. The third priority area is enabling a greener agenda, a greener future. This year we have published our climate change strategy and our tree strategy side by side. We are serious about tackling the climate emergency, and our action over the last year in this area speaks for itself. We acted quickly during the summer to harness the increase in active travel, making it safer and easier for people to walk or cycle in our town centres, and have recently been allocated even more funding to develop active travel schemes further. Our infrastructure projects, such as Farnham Town Centre, are focused on improving air quality and reducing polluting congestion. We have begun our programme of replacing every single one of Surrey's streetlights in environmentally friendly LEDs. And just last month, we agreed a huge, almost £50 million investment in ultra-low emission buses to help get people around this county in a clean and efficient way. We are absolutely investing in a greener future. Finally, Mr. Chairman, but no less importantly, we are engaging with communities. This is something that I've been talking about since I had the privilege to become leader of this council, and has progressed further and faster in the last few months. We want to reinvigorate our relationship with residents and make this part of the council's culture, build on the incredible partnership work we have seen at first hand during the pandemic, and support our communities to tackle local issues, while making it easier for everyone to play an active role in the decisions that will shape Surrey's future. We have already started this in earnest. It is really important that our residents have a clear and easily accessible route to influence policy making and decisions that affect them beyond local government elections every 4 years. Let's work together, strengthen our communities and create a better place to live. Mr. Chairman, I know that we have a brighter future ahead of us. We will overcome COVID. We will rise to the challenge of recovery, and we will continue to make Surrey the best place to live, to work and to grow a business. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you, Leader. I now call Mr. Nick Darby to speak. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will again begin with a huge vote of thanks to all our staff for their extraordinary efforts in challenging circumstances over the last 9 months. It became apparent early on in the pandemic that in many cases local solutions, local knowledge work best. That remains true today. Supporting the vulnerable, working with our partners is rightly the priority. On a less positive note, I turn to the spending review and its effect on Surrey. I remain convinced that for local government, these announcements come too late in the year, with a final settlement only at the end of December. Yet again, the settlement will only be for 1 year. This makes planning for anything beyond the short term extremely difficult, even worse in a pandemic. My thanks to our finance team for starting early. Overall, this simply reinforces to me the fact that local government is both unloved and underfunded by central government. And the figures. Yes, there is some extra money, but no, there is nothing to address the issue of adult care on a permanent basis. Promises of a green paper and a solution fading into the distant past. We simply cannot continue this. Promises, promises, words, no action. On council tax, Surrey are allowed to increase this, firstly by what I would call the usual 2%, but secondly by a further 3% ring-fenced for adult care to make a total potential increase of 5%. In that context, I note carefully what the leader has said just now. While 5% may help some authorities to balance the books, we will still be expected to make yet more cuts. 5% is way above inflation in the teeth of a pandemic, at a time when many will be unable to afford even the current level of council tax, let alone 5% more. Also, when the expectation of those in work having an annual pay rise has also passed. In that context, wage increases are being paused for public servants. This will inevitably result in difficult decisions for the leader for the Surrey budget over the next few months, and particularly bearing in mind our continued and absolutely correct acknowledgement of the efforts our staff have made. On a different note, the apparent demise of Crossrail 2 was announced quietly. Perhaps the leader could give us his view as to how this will affect us for the future. Still on figures, would the leader reassure us that the £42 million write-down of the Eco Park Shepperton investment in Surrey's latest accounts is either not a real loss, and why, or will be recouped in full? And finally, mental health. I was delighted that following the task group report, the Surrey Mental Health Summit took place last month. The trick is now to translate that enthusiasm from words into real action, and to do so quickly, to make sure that early help is available, that people do not feel abandoned, and that help remains at hand, in schools, at the time of transition, in later years when there is a crisis. I will finish on one sad, one happier note. Sad in many ways that we have come to the end of an era at County Hall. Happier in being able to wish all Surrey residents, all staff and all members a happy Christmas and the very best for 2021. We may even yet meet again in the vaccine queue. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. I now call Mr. Bottom to speak. Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome many of the things that both the Leader of the Council and Mr. Darby have said. I have major concerns about the national funding picture, and in particular the huge shortfall in adult social care, which does have to remain a significant risk to the residents of this county, given the state that many of our care homes are in, both financially and in terms of the sustainability of the workforce, likely to be seriously worsened by a no-deal Brexit. I want to pay tribute to the teachers and head teachers in our county who are at the front line, many of whom are at high risk and are already suffering from COVID as a result of their efforts. They have done so much to support the children of our county, and I'd like to see their work paid tribute to in extreme way. One of the most important things that the county is going to be doing in the next few months is the development and rollout of our autism strategy. Special needs funding is overspent by 90% of councils in this country. Special needs are under-resourced nationally. We need to fight to get the best resources we can for our children, and our autism strategy, which I think was begun when I moved a motion some 2 or 3 years ago, calling for an understanding of the growing demand that autism places, and a need to form a partnership with a university, which we have since done with the London South Bank University. The rollout of that autism strategy will make a huge difference to all our children, because the successful support for children with autism spectrum disorders has a massive impact also on all the other children in our schools. Can I call for a joint approach between the Cabinet members and the Scrutiny Committee in respect of addressing autism budgets and special needs budgets across the county, as I believe these make such a difference, and I hope we can work together. I was disappointed that a recent consultation was very hard to find, and I would have liked to have been involved in that, and I would have liked the Select Committee to have been involved in that at an earlier stage than it will be. Can I also say that I think the leader has pointed out the challenges that poverty will face and the number of people and number of families on universal credit. Universal credit is inadequate to meet the needs of many of our families. And I'm just sorry that we don't have a plan yet to feed the children over Christmas and address poverty. I do feel significantly the absence of our old-fashioned children's centres. I know they were old-fashioned and I know the model was discredited. But I do wish we could find a way of engaging the children and families again of our most vulnerable so that we can support them throughout this crisis. I wholeheartedly welcome the work of our county council and our county councillors in supporting our poor families, but I would really urge that we need to do a lot more to make sure that child poverty does not go unmatched and unsupported. Chairman, I've run out of my 3 minutes. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
You're welcome as always, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Essex, you have a question or a statement?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Leader. In response to your statement, you mentioned the climate change strategy, and you also mentioned continued health integration, and said that we really need to focus on delivering the climate strategy with all of our partners. Could you confirm that we now have full sign up from the health sector for our climate change strategy and also for schools, and that both of these will be included in the delivery plan that's being worked up? Because I think it's important that we are able to not just deliver through the councils, but show leadership across the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Essex. I've got one more at the moment. Mr. Witham.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to firstly thank the Leader of the Council for a very wide-ranging statement on many subjects, because although this year has been totally dominated by coronavirus, I think it's important that people in Surrey know that Surrey County Council and yourself and all of us are continuing to deal with all of the very wide range of responsibilities that the Council is responsible for, and COVID has not pushed those aside in any way. They are being dealt with robustly, so I thank the Leader for that. But obviously this year has been dominated by coronavirus, and so I just wanted to make a point and ask the Leader of the Council if he would agree with me that it is this vaccine that is being started today, the vaccine from Pfizer Biotech being rolled out. Should be and is, I think, a huge matter of national pride that this country is the first in the Western world to have developed, fully tested, approved, and from today is rolling out vaccines to our people. I think that that is a huge achievement. In less than a year, there are over 200 countries in the world, and Britain is leading the world today in this. The only other country that has a vaccine that is giving to its people is Russia, as of last weekend, but of course it approved it before it was fully tested. which drew criticism from many in scientific circles. So I think that we should say, a huge thank you to the many scientists who have been involved in developing this vaccine and to the NHS who are now rolling it out. And to answer a point that was made earlier about Brexit, sorry to mention Brexit again, but this vaccine is demonstration that it's actually not bad going for a tiny island just off the coast of Europe, the first in the world. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Witham. I've got two more speakers. Peter Martin.
Good morning, Chairman, and thank you very much indeed. Like you, can I just say I have a tinge of sadness at our last meeting from County Hall after so many years there. I have many happy memories of County Hall, but I think it's also very exciting that we are moving to a new centre within the current boundaries of Surrey. So well done to the Leader and to the Cabinet for enabling that to happen. My question is regarding vaccination policy, and like Mr. Witham, I'm very proud of the fact that we are able to roll out vaccinations earlier than any other country in the Western world. My request is that teachers and those in education get a higher priority in the vaccination rollout than they appear to have at the moment. Teachers have been in the forefront of what we have done to get back to normality, and they are putting themselves and have put themselves at risk, and I think that in the vaccination rollout they should have a rather higher priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And finally, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Unlike Nick Darby, actually, I felt the spending review outlined a lot of the government's ambitious plans, which will very much have an impact on local government. I noticed the Leader talks about stimulating an economic recovery and our ambitious plans on the green agenda with our climate strategy. However, these two factors are closely linked, and Surrey has the opportunity to facilitate an ambitious green recovery of our own. I hope the Leader does take advantage on elements within the spending review, such as the newly announced £4 billion levelling up fund, which I think will help progress a green recovery in Surrey, support our communities and invest in the local infrastructure that our residents truly want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Leader, would you care to respond, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the comments and questions. So just picking up a few of those and starting with really where Cameron has just finished in terms of the spending review. I mean, I share Nick Darby's frustration that we don't have a longer term spending review. Certainly in my years as an elected councillor, I've always called for certainty of funding for local government, which would enable us to take longer term decisions. But I understand the Chancellor's rationale this year, and I hope that next year, when things are a little bit more settled, he will revisit that and look at a 3-year spending review. Equally, I think that the government have, certainly in the case of this council, funded the COVID costs. I think we have been well supported by the government in that sense, and I think there are reasonable sums of money being made available, whether it's for specific schemes or otherwise, and we will continue to try and access those pots of money. On the long-term funding of adult social care, I mean, clearly that is something that we would all like to see. There is a report now, I gather, sitting at number 10. Which I hope they will progress. I don't know what it says, but I hope that they will progress that conversation next year. This year has been very difficult to balance the different agendas. But adult social care, long-term funding of that, and in particular that closer relationship with the health system, so that there is a kind of a smooth transition between the services that we provide and those provided by Surrey Heartlands. We will talk more about council tax, but we are in a sufficiently strong position that we do not and will not be levying 5% on the council tax. But that piece of work will go through the select committees, and I look forward to their input. On the specific points on the Eco Park, just to confirm to Nick Darby that that's actually just a revision to the value on the balance sheet. It has no impact on the revenue account, and we haven't started to pay for that asset yet, and won't do until it passes its acceptance test. As members will know, because it's been raised to Cabinet, there are continuing issues in the delivery of that contract, but we are very focused on finding a long-term solution. Now, to Chris Bolton's point, I mean, I think the autism strategy, which I think will be published on the 1st of April 2021, is a very good step forward. It may be that Julie Isles wants to comment on that in a bit more detail on her member statement cabinet update. But I'm sorry if you felt that there wasn't sufficiently early involvement of the select committees. I mean, we've worked hard, and with you particularly, Chris, to try and make sure that the select committees have sufficient opportunity to look at all of these things well in advance. So I'm quite sure that Julie Isles, as a cabinet member, will work closely with you as we move forward with that. In relation to supporting our children over Christmas, we have about 17,000 children that are eligible for free school meals across the county. We have a £2 million fund, which we will be using to support those families and children. 80% of that has to go to families with children, and of that 80%, or of that money, 80% of that has to be spent on food or utility bills. So there will be a voucher scheme that is being rolled out to all of those families over the Christmas period, and that funding will take us through to the end of March, 31st of March, and I'm hoping we will certainly be lobbying government for further funding beyond that period. And obviously we'll be debating a little bit later the whole issue of child poverty. To Jonathan Essex's point about the climate strategy, I mean, that is now has been socialised across many organisations, including the health system. I don't think I could say publicly that there has been full sign-up from the health sector, but there's certainly been a significant desire to do whatever they can to support that strategy, as indeed I think schools and other organisations. So we need probably some more commitment, perhaps from our district and boroughs as well. But it is a good strategy. It's clear. It's got ambition, and I hope that we can all do our parts in other organisations that we touch as part of our county council role to promote that strategy and encourage people to sign up to it. On the vaccine, I mean, I think it's a massive day for this country. It is without question fantastic that we have been able to develop that vaccine and to be the first country effectively to roll it out. That in itself is going to be a huge logistical exercise. Just in Surrey alone, that's going to involve something in the region of 1,000 people over the next few months, including drivers and marshals and those that will be administering the vaccine. Members will know that I believe that Rachel Crosley has taken up a temporary role to help in that rollout, and that I know she will do very effectively. The county has a long history of innovation here. I mean, not just about the vaccine, but actually, McLaren's is a good example that stepped in and use their technological capability and expertise to help with ventilators in the early stages of the pandemic. So, we have a good history here of in this country and in Surrey in particular of innovation. To Peter Martin's point about the rollout, I'm afraid that is something that is being controlled at a national level. We can certainly lobby probably Matt Hancock as the Secretary of State to do that. I suspect that once hopefully the AstraZeneca vaccine will also be approved shortly. And I think once we start to see more vaccine available, then hopefully that prioritisation order will change, and indeed the rollout will be as speedy as it can be. Royal Surrey started their vaccine programme this morning at 8 o'clock with, I think they had 975 shots, I think is how they're described. And that's it. As you know, there needs to be within 21 days for the second injection, and in I think it's the week after next, 6 of the primary care networks will also have 975 vials of the vaccine as well. So we will start to see, that rollout speed up over the coming weeks. But the very good thing is for us here and indeed nationally that process has started. I think, Mr. Chairman, hopefully that's picked up any of the points. If I haven't done that, then I'm happy to do so outside of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader. And as ever, the electronic copy of the Leader's statement will be circulated with the minutes of this meeting afterwards. So moving to item 6, members' questions. I have noticed of 16 questions, which you've got on page 5 of your supplementary agendas. 5 minutes per question for supplementary questions, and these must be framed as questions, please, and not statements, and be relevant to the original question. Question time will be limited to 45 minutes, at which point I will finish the question we were on and close the item. If any questions are not covered during the 45 minutes, a written answer has been tabled, and members can, of course, take this up directly with the relevant Cabinet member outside the meeting. There'll also be an additional 15 minutes for members to ask questions of Cabinet members based on the Cabinet members' briefings, which are on page 21 of the supplementary agenda, and these will be taken on a first-come, first-served basis as always, and there'll be no supplementaries. So, moving to the questions, Mr. Hawkins, do you have a supplementary? No, thank you. Moving to number 2, Mrs. Barbara Thompson, do you have a supplementary?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Question 3, Tina Mountain, do you have a supplementary?
I do, please, Mr. Chairman, if that's possible.
Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I could just say, please, what wonderful news this is for Epsom and Ewell. And I would ask you if you would agree with me that this shows quite clearly that Surrey County Council listens to its residents and acts upon their wishes by providing for the elderly and vulnerable at a time when my own borough of Epsom and Ewell has ignored hundreds of its residents and closed the Wells Community Centre, which was used so vastly by the elderly and vulnerable. Would you agree?
Anyone else? Mrs. Mooney, would you care to reply, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Councillor Mountain for her comment and for her original question, to be fair. I think anything that raises a profile around the excellent work that we're doing here at County Hall as Surrey County Council in regards to providing accommodation for our most vulnerable residents across the county, it's really important to raise that profile. I'm also really pleased for Epsom and Ewell. It's an area of high demand, and so I'm very pleased to be working with adult social care in ensuring that we deliver quite a substantial amount of supported accommodation. So thank you, Councillor Mountain. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And Mark Newty, you'd like to say something too. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, have I got my hand up by mistake?
You have, so not to worry. I'll move swiftly on to Claire Curran. Claire, do you have a supplementary to question 4?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I do. I'd like to thank the leader for his very full and informative response, and also say that I have found the community impact assessment to be a really remarkable piece of work, and I commend it to anybody who has not yet looked at it. One of the significant insights in the report is the impact that the pandemic has had upon the mental health of many people, and I think the leader touched on that in his statement. I'd ask the leader if he would be able to expand for the benefit of members upon the way in which all providers are preparing to meet the inevitable surge in demand for their services?
Thank you. Leader.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Mrs. Curran, for your question. I think there's an absolute recognition that there is and will be a significant growth in the demand for mental health services over these coming months and probably years. We will be reprocuring our CAMS contract with effect from the 1st of April, and that will be an alliance of 4 organisations. And I hope that will put more capacity into the system, and indeed promote our desire to address these issues as early as possible and wherever possible to prevent them. That will include a further rollout of mental health advisors in schools, which is really where we need to start. So I think that there will be a significant piece of work now undertaken by the Oversight Board that I mentioned earlier. That will probably report into the Health and Wellbeing Board, but will work across the whole of the system, both health and the County Council and our partners. Further resources going into resolve the waiting list, particularly on CAMS, and I hope that will happen very, very quickly. So I think the health system and the County Council absolutely need to work closely together, and we do need a plan to both address some of the issues currently in the way in which mental health services are provided, but particularly to make sure that we build in proper funding and capacity to enable us to extend that out across the whole of the population within Surrey, and that is exactly what we will do.
Leader. Peter Santo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for Transport for his response. Just have one follow-up question. What else is the Council doing to support sustainable travel in addition to walking and cycling?
Thank you. Mr. Furness, would you reply?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Peter. Yes, we have actually just recently on the 24th of November, the Cabinet approved £49 million to accelerate the introduction of ultra-low and zero-emission buses in Surrey. 32 million of this will be allocated to taking about 80 of the most polluting buses off of our network. 6.3 will go to community transport, and then there will be 9 million for bus priority as well. As members who attended the recent briefing with our partners and the operators, the bus priority measures are absolutely essential in reducing private vehicle use and increasing sustainable transport. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Furness. Mike Goodman, do you have a supplementary to your next question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Cabinet Member, for an excellent reply. This is really important for many of our residents, and I wonder if the Cabinet Member could explain how these residents could apply for these grants. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bramhall, would you care to reply, please?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Goodman, for your supplementary. Yes, it's very easy for residents to apply to Green Jump Surrey by contacting our delivery partner called Action Surrey on 0800 783 2503, or alternatively you can go straight to their website Action Surrey, where all the details are readily available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bramhall. Mr. Hall, do you have a supplementary to question 7?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have a couple of two small supplementaries. Can I thank the Cabinet Member for her very interesting reply? Can I ask, are the vouchers going to be distributed by schools or via schools? And secondly, how do people access the Surrey Crisis Fund?
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And Claire Curran, you've got a question too.
Thank you, Chairman. Very much the same question that Councillor Hall has just asked. I have been doing my very best to publicise in my division the availability of crisis funding for families, but a couple of people have come back to me to ask the very same question. It's not clear in any of the publicity to whom families should turn in the first place, whether that should be to their schools. Some of the families that now find themselves in financial difficulties have never had contact with public agencies before and are not used to asking for help. And in fact, what I have had to do is point them in the direction of the coronavirus helpline in the absence of anywhere else. So it was the same question that Councillor Hall has raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cullen. Mrs. Isles, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted to be able to answer the question, not least because Councillor Bottom is already being quoted on Twitter as saying that sorry, we don't have a plan yet to feed children over Christmas. We do have a plan, and we've had a plan throughout this. In answer to the specific questions, the delegated decision was taken on the 30th of November about the use of this winter fund. It's to upper tier authorities, it's for purchasing food, paying utility bills and other essential supplies. It isn't restricted to vulnerable households in receipt of benefits, because I recognise what Councillor Curran says, that many of these families will be in the system for the first time and not knowing where to go. We've received tranche one of that funding paid early in December, so the plan is definitely there to feed children through the school holidays. The second and third tranches will follow once we've analysed the data to be able to distribute that through to the Easter period. So we are working with the local resilience forum, with our welfare cell and with head teachers to develop these proposals, along with the education cell and our school phase head teachers, also our school catering system and our voluntary and community faith sector. If anybody is struggling, the first port of call will be through the Surrey Crisis Fund, and the telephone number for that is 0300 200 1008. It operates Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. It's also available online. It's also accessible through the Citizens Advice Bureau. In the simplification of this, school leaders and welfare leads consider that vouchers are a very effective means of targeting food support during the school holidays, but we also work with food banks to be able to work with our district and borough colleagues. And I will say that one Liberal Democrat funded council sat on the reserves that were provided for funding up to the summer holidays and said it wasn't needed and put it in their general funds. So we do perhaps need to do a little bit more with some of those colleagues. Other families who will not benefit from extra targeted support for children on preschool meals can be targeted via the Surrey Crisis Fund. And we're also looking at low-income families from the 2-year-old fully funded entitlement and the 3- and 4-year-olds on pupil premium. We've got data on those and we can support them through our early years providers. So there is a comprehensive package to make sure that vulnerable families are supported, not just for food, but also for other essentials and things such as white goods to prevent them falling into debt. So I hope that reassures people that we have this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Isles. Question 8, Mr. Forster, do you have a supplementary?
No supplementary question, Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Watson, question 9, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Given the Cabinet member's lack of familiarity with the highways figures for Mole Valley, will he inform himself by looking at the forward plan for Mole Valley highways on the agenda of tomorrow's Mole Valley Local Committee, which shows the inadequate amount of funding available for road safety schemes, including 20-mile-per-hour speed limits? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Essex.
Thank you. Just following up on the question, across the country, around 20 million people live in 20-mile-an-hour speed limit areas. Could you confirm what the comparable figure is for Surrey? And also, when you say that this is good for appropriate locations, whether that extends beyond the individual sites that you've quoted in the answer to also neighbourhood areas, as is far commoner outside of Surrey.
Thank you. Mr. Furness, would you reply, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, just in response to Councillor Watson, the figure that you have quoted is what your local committee has decided to effectively allocate to these resources. As you can see, Mole Valley has a significant amount of money, and yet again I have increased the amount of money that has gone to local committees and joint committees. So it's actually down to your local committee to determine what your priorities are, and that money has been allocated to you for you to do that. It's not fair for you to then turn that around and blame lack of adequate funding. As you can clearly see, it has been increased year on year. Councillor Essex, yes, we are doing neighbourhood, and Guildford actually was the first 20-mile-an-hour neighbourhood that we have allocated recently. It's currently going through its consultation. I fully support 20-mile-an-hour neighbourhoods, but again, it's where appropriate. We can't do blanket 20-mile-an-hours across the whole of the county, and we do need to bear in mind that we do need to move vehicles around. People do need to get around. So yes, fully supportive, schools, high pedestrian areas, and also neighbourhoods as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Furness. Mr. Robert Evans, your first question. Do you have a supplementary?
I do. Thank you very much, Chair. And can I thank the Cabinet member for her answer? In the last 10 years, the population of Surrey has risen by over 60,000 to nearly 1.2 million people. So more homes, more cars, more activity. Over the same period, by the Cabinet member's own admission, the Fire and Rescue Service has seen its numbers cut by nearly 1/3, almost 200 fewer professionals to protect the people of Surrey. Does the Cabinet member have sleepless nights about this? And who does she blame for these cuts, the Council or central government? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Turner-Stewart, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Evans, for your supplementary question. Just in terms of the framework that we work within, I think it's quite important to reinforce, as has set out by Sir Thomas Windsor, HM Chief Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services. The HMIC FRS focus is on the operational service provided to the public, and the inspection is a rounded assessment of every fire and rescue service and covers effectiveness, efficiency and how it looks after its people. Effectiveness is the operational service provided to the public, including prevention, protection and response, and the efficiency of the service, how well it provides value for money, allocates resources to match risk and collaborates with our other emergency service partners. So the HMIC FRS assessments are designed to enable the public to see how each fire and rescue service is performing, including changes over time and in relation to the performance of other services. Taking that all into account, Mr. Evans, I think you also need to understand that you're not looking at, we have flexible part-time contracts. Appliance availability is not linked and does not correlate with these figures. And in fact, the FBU agreed to a reduction of crewing figures from 5 to 4 within that 10-year period. We have resilience, which is built in for large-scale and long-duration incidents, and business continuity plans, which allows our staff to redeploy back into operations. And I think you also need to accept that our staff are supported to redeploy due to illness, age and condition. And given the fact that we absolutely support our staff, we would support their condition and ability to deliver and to enable them to be remaining with our fire and rescue service and be deployed into the positions that they are able to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Goodwin, question 11. Do you have a supplementary?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Leader of the Council for his response. And here is my follow-up question. Will the Leader share in due course the evidence that shows what a difference Surrey County Council's funding is making to the groups that I listed in my original question? For example, how is it reducing the demand for help for people being discharged from hospital? And how is it reducing the numbers of domestic abuse? And how is it reducing the numbers of safeguarding vulnerable adults? I think that would be an interesting response for all members here. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Few.
Thank you, Chairman. In response to the previous Cabinet member's questions, I'd like to ask Councillor Evans if he has any statistical evidence on the correlation of his question that he's just raised.
Thank you, Will. I'll let the leader reply first of all to the first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Goodman, for the question. I've given a full answer to the points that you have raised. Can I suggest that if you want to investigate that further, you take that through the Select Committee? Thank you.
And as a courtesy only, Mr. Few, I'll ask Mr. Evans if he wishes to reply to that comment. Mr. Evans.
I wasn't aware that I was entitled to, but I'm not sure quite what Mr. Few is referring to, because the figures and everything are the ones that the Cabinet member produced.
Thank you. You'll both no doubt take this away in another place. Thank you. Mr. Essex, your question 12. Do you have a supplementary?
I do, and thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank the Cabinet member for her response first. The Freedom of Information request that I quoted in the question states that in January 2020, delays in achieving hot commissioning and or full service commencement beyond March 2020 would, I quote, be unlikely to be affordable for DEFRA. Please can you confirm if this position is still the case? And if so, what are the cost implications for Surrey County Council of going beyond that commissioning deadline? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bramall.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Essex for his supplementary. I'm sorry, but that is confidential information, but I'm happy to share with him outside of the public domain. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Watson, your second question. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Given the climate change emergency declared by this council, will the Cabinet member have another look at the emails I forwarded to her, which show that the officers of the County Council's Property Department have already reviewed the site that I'm proposing for planting trees in order to speed up the process of planting trees on County Council land? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Back to you, Mrs. Bramall, once again.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the member for her supplementary. However, I did find her whole question somewhat disingenuous. Unfortunately, I wasn't prepared to break lockdown and meet the member for a coffee. I don't do things like that. The Milwaukee Forest Principle that you requested needs far more maintenance than a normal planted woodland. I do find it slightly strange that Mole Valley should possibly take up so much of our limited budget, so that we then have to restrict planting in other boroughs. We will go and view the site, but I cannot guarantee that it will be brought forward, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Mr. Robert Evans, your second question. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. I do, and I thank the leader for his response. Despite the positive news on the virus, I think it's unlikely that we will be back to completely normal for the elections in May next year. Notwithstanding the antics across the Atlantic, and quite apart from genuine security and legitimacy about elections, is the leader aware and is he concerned that there are many councils seem to be making it more difficult, increasingly complicated to apply for postal votes, especially for anyone who doesn't have access to the internet?
Thank you. Mrs. White.
Thank you, Chairman. As a follow-up question, my understanding is that European citizens who are registered to vote in this country will be able to take part in the local elections in May next year. Could the leader please confirm that that is the case and make sure that sufficient publicity is given to make it so that those people know that they have a right to vote?
Thank you, Fiona. Leader, would you respond, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I thought Mr. Evans was actually going to suggest that we abandon the elections next year and left the administration in charge for another 4 years. If that's his proposal, I'd have to think long and hard about whether I would agree to that. In the meantime, I think that Paul Turrell, the Chief Executive of Runnymede Borough Council, is the returning officer, working closely with Joanna Killian, our returning officer for the county elections. and a lot of work is being done in terms of making the polling stations, in particular, COVID safe. There will be a marshal on at each door of the polling station, directing people to the dispensing, the people that are dispensing the ballot papers and so on. There'll be plenty of PPE. Voters will be told to wear masks, and there'll be a free supply of those at the polling station and so on. So a lot of effort, and there'll be some county staff freed up to help with that. It should be as safe as possible for people to vote in person if they choose to do that. On the postal vote point, I think that I'm not aware of there being difficulties for people to register for postal votes. You can certainly do that online, or you can pop into your local council offices, and I'm sure we can probably direct people at our libraries as well. I think the challenge is probably the number of people that will be seeking to register for postal votes. Certainly those have been increasing year on year, and it may well be that there is a short delay in turning those around. So people that should apply early. But I'm not aware, from what I'm told, that there's any major issue in people seeking registration. But if Mr. Evans knows of any particular areas, then perhaps you can let me know, and I'll pass it on to the returning officers. I'm afraid, an election agent. I don't know the answer to Mrs. White's question. I'm sure that will be available on the government website.
Thank you, Leader. And Mr. Essex, you've got the last two questions to the Cabinet Member for Transport. Could you give any supplementaries to both now to him? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try a two-in-one approach. For the first question, this follows the approach I've had from residents, including a blind resident that struggled with parking that's unable to be controlled because double yellow lines are unable to be enforced. And I've shared a list of sites that I hope can be dealt with quickly. And I'd like if you could just confirm that your response indicates a safety first approach, which I guess means that, for example, that the missing sign at the entrance of a 20-mile-an-hour area locally that's been absent for a number of months can now be dealt with promptly. And just in terms of the last question, please could you confirm that the budgets to implement these would be taken via the local and joint committees, or whether they would be done centrally? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Essex. Yes, in regards to your first question, if you are able to share with me the reference numbers where you have reported this, I can follow up with the local team. On the second one, we are just setting the budgets for the next year. As you know, we were extremely successful by getting the third highest award from government for active travel. A number of the LSWIPs, which including Woking, actually is going to be funded out of that because the section was that. So it will be going through joint and local committees for their consultation and approval, but the money may not be directly allocated. It may be centrally, but the local and joint committees will have a full involvement in the process. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Furness. And that's the end of members' questions, but not the end of members' opportunity to ask questions of the Cabinet members based on their Cabinet members' briefings. I haven't seen any indications as yet, but, oh yes, Kay Hammond. Kay. Kay, we can't hear you as yet. Okay, we'll come back to you. Oh,
can you hear me now?
Yes, do go ahead, Kay.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. My fingers are a bit sticky. I have a question for Mary Lewis in relation to the item on her update to Council on the single point of access. This time last year, the Select Committee, the members of the Children, Families, Lifelong Learning and Culture Select Committee visited the Children's Single Port of Access, the CSPA, following its launch in April 2019. We were very impressed with the service then. However, I just really wanted to know, since the service, since we saw them in December 2019, gosh, these years do fly by, don't they? particularly as the report shows the increase of numbers of contacts it's received during the COVID-19 pandemic. How is it doing now, please?
Well, thank you, Kate. Mrs. Lewis.
Sorry, Chairman, I apologise. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hammond, for reminding me of that nice visit that we made to the Sea Spa for the scrutiny meeting there. It was an excellent bit of scrutiny. Members asked some really pertinent questions after seeing the Sea Spa, the children's single point of access in action, and it was nice to be reminded of it. Two different responses. First of all, how has it kept on with the transformation and improvement, and how has it coped with business as usual? So starting with improvement, we haven't stopped improving, you'll be pleased to hear, as chair of the scrutiny committee. I remember when we went on that visit, the chair of Family Voice, our parents forum, came with us, and I remember her saying, I wish we could have a single point of access like this for learners. And that has happened. A learner spa has been developed along the lines of the Sea Spa, and they will be co-locating in the near future. So that's something that's carried on improving. The Sea Spa has moved to Quadrant Court in Woking, its permanent home, because there will be space there for the learner spa as well. So altogether, they've really continued in spite of the of COVID-19. As you mentioned, they have experienced an increase in demand for help. That's in the region of about 30% increase in calls versus the same time last year. So they're now taking about 500 phone calls a week, 1,300 emails. But what's been absolutely astounding is that they have still achieved a 95% rate of answering calls within 20 seconds. So, I mean, I think that's just absolutely fantastic work by our officers there. That's in the point of asking for help. Then, of course, contacts have to be progressed either to social care or to early help. They've continued to meet a 2-day working average on that, even with the greater volumes. In the last 6 months, it's over 5,500 assessments that have been completed. That's 34% more than the same time last year. But actually on that, timeliness has improved. So again, a remarkable statistic. I could go on with the statistics for those that like them, but as you can see from all of this, the timeliness has really held up. And what really, really pleases me is that in 94% of cases, in the assessments, the children were actually seen even during the early period of COVID when we had problems with PPE. Obviously, there's some grit in this positive oyster that I'm delivering to you. The grit is, of course, the caseloads have gone up because you can't have this kind of increase in volume and keep your caseloads low. We've got down to around 15. They've now doubled in some cases. And that means that we really need to think about the well-being of our staff, and we really need to get our partners to support us in bringing down the number of contacts that they're making and to do a lot more triaging themselves. But our staff have really gone the extra mile to support children, and I'd like to thank everyone from our interim DCS, who's the Chief Executive, our directors, everyone down to the frontline teams, because they've really kept up the work at the front door of our children's services in the crisis. So maybe your scrutiny committee can come back and have another visit later in the year when we can all get together. Thank you very much for asking.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lewis. And I have to close the list at 7 people, and if the replies could be as short and swift as possible, but still having time to give the proper reply to the answer. So I've got Chris Townsend, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've got a question to Mr. Newty about libraries. I'd like assurance that any changes to the library service over the coming year, and part of that programme, they actively involve the divisional member where that library is involved. I think it's absolutely vital that the local member is totally involved in any discussions concerning the library service in their area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Newty.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend, for that. Yes, you have my assurance that all members will be counselled on any changes we're going to make to the local library service. That's always been the case and always will be the case. If there is anything in particular that you need to discuss, you can always catch hold of me on email or phone. But as we go round the county with the transformation project and the co-design, the members will be obviously paramount to that, and also the borough councils. Everybody will be consulted and involved in what's going on. It's very exciting. It's coming to a place near you next year where we're up and running again with the transformation. So bit by bit, we will gradually get round everybody's area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Isles.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe I have the opportunity to speak to some matters arising from my report, although there hasn't been a direct question just at the moment. On the autism strategy, I didn't have the space to include some more information about that. The consultation closed on the 21st of September. We are running workshops during the course of this month, and we have also established a Children's Partnership Board. So that means we've got the involvement of children and young people as part of this strategy, which is also important. And that meets for the first time in January. So we are very pleased to be taking this forward as an all-age approach to what is a prime recognition of treatments and conditions within our special needs cohort, and something that we are planning additional places around. And Council will be aware of the capital investment that we're making in special education needs. And that also speaks to a point from earlier about a consultation on the funding for special education needs. We do continue to lobby government around that. It is recognised as a national issue, and I wait for some long-term spending review of that. But in the meantime, it was mentioned about a consultation which has been hidden. Nothing hidden. We had a cabinet paper on the 24th of November, and it was about schools and early years funding. As Council will be aware, Schools Forum is the body that make a number of decisions around the funding formula for the Direct Schools Grant and the High Needs Block as a result of that. And we have the next meeting with Schools Forum on December the 10th, where we will continue to discuss the best use not only of top-up funding, but also independent support for the pupils, so that schools will have their own flexibility to be able to perhaps address the needs and not have a static response when a child moves away from the school. So I hope that provides clarity around that consultation. And to the point of it coming to Select Committee, I'm sure the Chairman of Children, Family, Lifelong Learning and Culture Select Committee can look at that, bringing that forward on the work stream for the budget setting. And this doesn't apply until September 2021, so we are working in advance, and I just wanted to provide reassurance around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Isles. Mr. Essex.
Thank you. It's a question for Mr. Few, as I was just reading your resources update, which states that residents might expect a 4.99% increase in council tax, which contrasts with the leader statement an hour ago that the increase will be well below 5%. Is your statement now out of date, or is this just sort of trying to dance with numbers? Because, you know, since the central government decided that instead of government paying for some of the care funding for councils, we now ask residents to pay that extra on their council tax instead by cleverly calling it something else called the Adult Social Care Levy.
Thank you. Mr. Few.
Yeah, I can respond to that fairly quickly. This document was presented in time for the Democratic Services to issue them. At the point of writing, no decision has been made on the council tax, although the leader this morning confirmed that it will not be the 3.3% plus the 1.99. So yes, that is therefore indication of what the government said at the time of writing. I hope that clarifies your question.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kington.
Thank you. I note this is a question for the Cabinet Member for Highways. I note the Cabinet Member in his statement has provided data on the number of requests received for trees on the highway. I've long pressed for that data to be provided, and it's good to see that it's being collated. Unfortunately, the experience of many applicants in Epsom and Newell thus far is still for their requests to be rejected, and the new policy is not making much difference up to the street scene. Crucially, the £25 application fee is non-returnable, and residents are seeing this as a money earner for Surrey County Council with no benefit to the residents. Going forward, as well as publishing the number of applications, will the Cabinet member also publish the statistics on the number of successful and unsuccessful applications? Does he also have a annual target for the number of successful applications, both as a total number and as a percentage of the applications made?
Thank you very much indeed. Would you care to reply, please?
Thank you, Chairman. It seems to be a perennial problem in Epsom and Ewell. I don't know what's going on there. At the end of the day, we are being very proactive in planting trees. Councillor Bramall and the programme of the 1.2 million trees that are being facilitated, a lot of these are actually being facilitated on the highway, and this is a particular fund that has been set out for the delivery of those trees. It's very difficult to say what statistics that you're particularly wanting. Maybe we can have a discussion offline because it does seem to be mixing two different projects at the moment, one from residents and one of the council's facilitating of the 1.2 million trees being planted. So maybe we can discuss that offline and then we can find the figures that you're after. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Furness. Claire Curran.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question for Mrs. Lewis, please. Mrs. Lewis, I note in the first paragraph of your Cabinet update that there are still 3 of the districts and boroughs across Surrey that do not support the unified care leavers offer. Does that mean that these 3 districts and boroughs still do not offer care leavers the agreed exemption to council tax that other districts and boroughs, and indeed our own authority, have agreed? What steps can we take, both as members and officers, to bring pressure on these outstanding, on these 3 districts and boroughs to agree to join in the offer which all the other authorities in Surrey have agreed to?
Thank you, Mrs. Curran. Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you, Mrs. Curran, for drawing everyone's attention to this. As you know, in the 2018 Ofsted inspection, it was flesh-creepingly difficult to sit in front of the inspectors when they quoted to us the voices of our young people in care and care leavers who told us about the unequal offer that they received in different parts of the county. And ever since then, we've been encouraging in the most diplomatic way, by letters, by meetings and other things, for all our colleagues across the county in districts and boroughs to join with us in supporting care leavers with council tax exemption. Now, I'm going to give some credit here where it's due, because I remember that Will Forster was championing this in the county council before I knew very much about it. And Woking, which is a borough where Will is a member, but it's a Conservative-led council, they were quick to get onto this even before the county. But the county in the last year, under this administration, in the last 2 years rather, has agreed to make care leavers exempt from council tax until the age of 25. Most of the districts and boroughs have done the same. Epsom and Ewell, I think we've got some members of the county council who are dual-hatted there. Waverley and Tandridge, I think one of our corporate parenting board members is a councillor at Tandridge. We really would like to see those councils joining in with us so that when we have our next Ofsted inspection, we can actually say the county has a standard offer for care leavers. They are all exempt from council tax until the age of 25. And that would show that we really are following up on our corporate parenting responsibilities. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. We've got time for one more question from Mr. Harrison. Nick.
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you. Actually, 2 very quick questions. One for Mrs. Bramall, one for Mr. Furness. For Mrs. Bramall, the Epsom CRC queuing system, I think, trial comes to an end at the end of this calendar year. And she let me know what the plans are beyond into January. And for Mr. Furness, congratulations on the move to LED. Good progress being made. Are there any plans to revisit the nighttime switch off as a result of this reduction in electricity consumption? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Bramall.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Harrison. The trial has been very successful, apart from a small number of residents that book but then don't arrive to deposit their rubbish. We're currently reviewing the trial, and I'll let you know as soon as possible as to whether that will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very quick. No, there are no plans to revisit turning the lights on overnight. As you can imagine, we are looking to save not only the taxpayer money, but in addition to that, the carbon savings are still an important factor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for a very good session on that item. Item 7, statements by members on local matters. And I've received notice of one statement from Mr. Eber Kington, which he assures me is on a local issue, and I therefore call Mr. Kington to make a statement of 2 minutes maximum without further discussion or right of reply. Over to you, Mr. Kington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one topic that's dominated my email box and answer phone more than any other since the last council meeting are the long queues of sometimes more than 2 hours faced by residents in my division as they get into the Surrey County Council Recycling Centre in Epsom. It was not only an inconvenience to them, but the businesses around the CRC suffered as their customers and suppliers struggled to access their premises. Mr. Chairman, those queues no longer exist because Councillor Natalie Bramble arranged for a booking system to be put in place, and I certainly would not have raised this matter in a member statement had it not been for an extraordinary political leaflet issued to residents in my division and across Epsom and Ewell in the name of 2 county councillors, a leaflet which has created anger amongst residents in my division and a request that I make their feelings known. In the leaflet, and in an attempt to deflect responsibility from Surrey County Council for the problems associated with delays, they make the extraordinary claim that the fault lies with the Borough Council's weekly recycling system. Note the term weekly, Mr. Chairman, and imply that residents in my division are failing to recycle sufficiently at home every week, but instead are regularly turning up at the CRC and causing long queues and clogging up the roads. The fact that my residents recycle a great deal at home every week, but use the CRC, which they pay for in their council tax, to deposit bulky waste, white electrical goods, DIY material, excess waste, is quite clearly beyond the authors of this leaflet. I've no idea what their intention was, but I've been asked by several residents and 2 Residents' Association meetings to raise this matter and express their dismay. Claiming that queuing was all down to lack of recycling by residents or lack of recycling opportunities was a serious error of judgment and has deflected attention away from the more positive comments I've received about the booking system. Mr. Chairman, we owe it to residents to acknowledge when things go wrong in a service provided by Surrey County Council. We also have to be honest about the causes. And perhaps, Mr. Chairman, someone can have a conversation with those 2 county councillors and suggest that honesty is also the best policy, even in political leaflets.
Thank you. Item 8, original motions. I have received notice of one original motion, staying in the name of Mrs. Fiona White.
Is Mrs. White speaking?
No, Mrs. White lost sound, as did quite a few other members by the sound of things, but it seems to have come back now.
I can hear everything.
I couldn't hear the chairman.
I think he was invited to.
I'm sorry?
Yes, but it's the chairman who's missing, surely.
Well, I think the chairman was inviting you to propose your motion, Mrs. White.
Thank you, Leader, in which case I formally propose the motion standing in my name on the Council's agenda.
I understand that Mr. Forster is seconding the motion. Will, do you want to speak now or do you want to reserve your position?
I would like to speak now, if that's okay, Chairman.
With pleasure, Mr. Forster. Do go ahead.
Can I formally propose my motion first, Chairman, with Councillor Forster speaking after me?
I did ask you, so you've obviously missed me, Fiona. Please propose your motion, Mrs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, the purpose of this original motion is very clear. It is for this council to recognise the issue of child poverty in Surrey and resolve to do something about it. It was the situation with COVID-19 that brought the issue of child poverty and particularly free school meals into focus. But child poverty didn't begin there. It has been a growing problem for a long time, and it's likely to get worse as the consequences of the pandemic work their way through our society. Already, as has been referred to earlier in the meeting, the numbers of people claiming universal credit across Surrey are rising, many of them in families who have never had to claim any benefits up until now. They live in all our divisions and not just those usually considered to have been deprived. Our children's vision for Surrey is to deliver better opportunities of outcome for children and young people. Hungry children can't make the most of the education provided for them. We need a targeted action to provide breakfast clubs where they don't already exist and to support existing clubs that are struggling because of the COVID crisis. This is why Clause 1 of the resolution is so clear and unequivocal and not lost in jargon. We need to accurately record the extent of child poverty in Surrey. All the things listed in the amendment, which has been published, contribute to that, and to that extent I find no difficulty with it. But let's not lose the action in a plethora of words. And it's no good just identifying the problem. We need to do something about it, which is why side in the revenue budget is essential. This is the time to make that decision, not once the budget is set. Let's please be proactive about it. We must recognise that Surrey cannot solve this problem alone. We need government to act. The welfare system does not provide the support needed. If it did, we wouldn't have food banks all over Surrey. There are families where parents are working 2 jobs and still they don't bring in enough to pay their bills and provide enough food. It is a disgrace that hard-working people don't earn enough to provide for their families without top-up benefits. Government needs to ensure, that the minimum wage is set at a level that realistically enables people working full-time to meet their living costs, and that anyone needing to use universal credit can have their claims dealt with quickly and efficiently, so that they don't have to wait nervously, wondering whether they will be able to meet their commitments until the benefits start. I will happily support the idea that the government should continue to fund local government to mitigate the effects of COVID-19. That goes without saying, or it should if we trust the government that far. As to the amendment put forward, it doesn't really add much substance to the original motion. There's a lot of self-congratulatory wording, and I do wonder about the wording "support the leader" at the beginning of Clause 7 of the amendment. Sounds a bit too much like the stance of the Chinese Communist Party for my liking. Fellow members, please, can we just pass a simple motion which makes it clear that this council recognises child poverty in Surrey as well as the rest of the country, resolves to take some positive actions to do something about it, and doesn't try to hide behind a lot of words that cover what should be happening in any event. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, you didn't hear me again, but Mr. Forster's indicated that he's seconding and wishes to speak now. Will, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy and very keen to second this motion, but I will be honest, I've really struggled to put together a speech for this. As this motion is so uncontroversial, I hope every councillor will support it. The principles and actions contained in the motion are self-evident. Ending child poverty and feeding children are moral imperatives. It must be a priority for the County Council. By ensuring every child is well fed, we can make sure that they get the most of that out of their education. Why I'm keen that the council works with schools across the county to create school breakfast clubs, so children get off to the day at a really strong point and they are not hungry as they are in class. As someone who was on free school meals as a child, I know firsthand how important this is. There is so much stress going on in children's lives. There's so much for them to worry about, particularly if you're from a disadvantaged background. Let's take one of those worries away from them. Let's make sure they don't have to worry about having food on the table, whether it's breakfast, lunch or dinner. Let's make their lives easier so they can fulfil their potential. Chairman, members, I really hope you can support this motion unamended.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forster. The matter is now open for debate, but Mrs. Lewis wishes to move the amendment as referred to by Mrs. White, set out on pages 2 and 3 in Roman numerals of the supplementary agenda. Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman. As lead member for Children, Young People and Families Wellbeing, I'd like to welcome the sentiments behind the motion as proposed by Fiona White and seconded by Will Forster. I'm very concerned indeed about the effects of poverty on children and families in Surrey. I absolutely agree with Mrs. White that the words of our community vision, "No one left behind," must be really meaningful and must apply to everyone, not least our youngest children. Something I've learnt from the first 1,000 Days initiative that we have been running for 2 years with our health colleagues is the shocking fact that development at the age of 22 months is a strong predictor for academic achievement by the age of 26 years. So much is influenced by early development and parents need every support with this. Poverty affects babies even in the womb through the health of their mothers. So poverty is hugely complex and, I agree with Mrs. White's motion here, a systemic issue. Food, fuel, housing and transport poverty, all of them lead to significant health inequalities. COVID-19 has revealed very starkly the differences these make, and also, as never before, the impact of digital poverty, which has affected schooling, online access to services and much more. So not only is poverty a complex issue, much more so than food poverty alone, which is cited in this motion, but it is systemic and requires a system-wide response. Without that, we will end up with another well-intentioned initiative that doesn't make the necessary difference. And this is where I feel that Mrs. White's motion falls short and needs amending. Having highlighted the systemic nature of the problem, it then mentions only one type of poverty and it rushes to a quick conclusion that funding breakfast clubs will be a solution. I therefore find the motion as it stands to be too simplistic, whereas the proposed amendment looks as a council-wide and system-wide response. So turning to the amended resolutions that I'm proposing, they bring the discussion right up to date. For example, one small silver lining of COVID-19 has been the availability of much more data about individual families and communities that are struggling. Multiple agencies reported needs, the Local Resilience Forum, and help was delivered. And the richer data from this activity during the pandemic and qualitative evidence gathered from families about their lived experience in Surrey has been built into the community impact assessment, which has already been referenced in this meeting. That data can help us and our partners to tackle poverty in a more systemic way as we go into 2021, and we hope a slightly more post-COVID world. There was a members' seminar yesterday which gave a lot of detail about the community impact assessment and how it shows the challenges facing our residents. Some members were present, but I recommend to the proposers of this motion, Mrs White and Mr Forster, that they watch the recording. Mrs Watson was there and she commented at the seminar how good the data now is about adults suffering from digital poverty, and the same kind of data is now available for children and families down to ward level, we hope, in the near future. At the recent Health and Wellbeing Board, partners were positive about this work as well, and several of our important partners like districts and boroughs who deliver housing, health partners, said that they would be using the information from the assessment to plan their delivery of services in future. So this indicates that by having good data, we can work as a system together to tackle the issue of poverty, and this is the approach I'm advocating in my amendment. There may have been one silver lining of COVID in the data, but mostly it is really bad news for families and their finances. In 2020 and in the year ahead, we've seen and we will continue to see different families coming into poverty as the employment impact of COVID takes hold. That's why the work that the Deputy Chief Executive is leading with the Department Work of Pensions, Citizens Advice, Surrey Welfare Rights and others is hugely important, because we'll hear about families as they start experiencing problems with their finances and before those problems escalate. The Children's Single Point of Access, which was also mentioned earlier in the meeting, has been working on this through community connectors, through our family centres, making contact with families when needs arise. Entrenched poverty, the burden of new debt, and all the categories of poverty mentioned need a systemic response from us and our partners. And when it comes to systemic and sustainable responses to poverty, the one that really matters is having an economy that works for everyone. We need to support the economic recovery and to stimulate growth, to facilitate skills training that gives our residents access to new high-quality jobs that we must help to create. The only long-term solution to family poverty affecting children is having a buoyant Surrey economy with good levels of stable employment, and that's why the work of the One Surrey Growth Board is so important for helping children and young people fulfil their potential in future. We need to grow a sustainable economy so everyone can benefit. That's the priority that we have in the Council. So as you can see from my amendment, I reference many things that are happening and need to continue around the Council and with partners to provide a system-wide approach to poverty affecting families. Amended Resolution 5, I ask in that for members to support our newly arrived Executive Director of Children, Families and Lifelong Learning and Culture to follow up on an assessment of the data in the Community Impact Assessment and to work with partners to tackle the issue. As lead member for children, I will happily support her in this, and it is completely in line with our shared statutory duties in Section 10 of the Children Act 2004, which states the DCS and lead member must lead, promote and create opportunities for cooperation with local partners, for example, health, schools, housing services, early years, higher and further education and employers to improve the well-being of children and young people. Our roles involve galvanising system-wide responses to systemic problems, and that's what the amended motion suggests. So I ask you, please,
Mrs. Lewis, you need to wind up now, please.
Thank you. So whilst we can all welcome give a heartfelt welcome to the short-term support of £2.2 million in the winter package from the government, the package of resolutions in the amended motion asks the Council to support a long-term partnership response, which is needed to tackle this systemic problem, and I therefore commend the amendment to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. And I understand Mrs. Arles is seconding the amendment. Julie, do you want to speak now or reserve your position?
I would like to speak now, please, Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I too welcome Mrs. White raising awareness of child poverty, but the scope of her motion is too narrow. It doesn't recognise that a system-wide effort is required, whereas the amended motion put forward by Mrs. Lewis covers this and other areas of poverty which impact families. It includes the need to lobby for appropriate funding, and it recognises and develops a huge amount of work which is already underway with Surrey County Council and our partners. These aren't self-congratulatory words or simply following the leader. These are real actions and work programmes which are underway now. As she wasn't at yesterday's members' seminar about the COVID impact assessment, I too suggest that Mrs White check the recording or visit the Surrey Eye website to take a look at this valuable piece of research. This, in conjunction with the work of the One Surrey Growth Board, the Health and Wellbeing Board and the First 1,000 Days Initiative, as referenced in the amended motion, does far more to inform us of what the issues are and where they are appearing than simply calling for a report on child poverty as per the original motion. The earlier response to the question on the winter grant scheme demonstrates the power of a coordinated response with school leaders and partners. The voucher scheme is very effective in targeting food support during school holidays, but as I've already said, we're working with food banks alongside this. And particular examples are in Chertsey, for example, where they're organising hampers with Christmas treats, and schools in Farnham have flagged the families in need of hampers and presents. Mary Lewis has spoken about the importance of the First 1,000 Days programme, and one of those work streams focuses on closing the outcome gap to ensure every child, irrespective of background, can reach their full potential. Poverty is a key driver for poor outcomes. On average, 78% of children in Surrey achieve a good level of development at the end of their reception year. This drops to 29% when we're looking specifically at children on free school meals. It's a clear inequality and it has lifelong impacts. Recognising the importance of that early start in life, I'm proud of the work that we've done to maintain early years funding. And we've made sure that we've been able to support our supply chain, especially those serving our most disadvantaged population areas. Our team also gave evidence on this and our early years strategy to the parliamentary team investigating this issue. And the last Cabinet report detailed an increase in all funding rates in the funding formulae and increases in the funding rates for free school meals provision at early years. With our Surrey Alliance for Excellence network, we're addressing the gap for our disadvantaged cohort, and work is underway with sector leads and includes the Education Endowment Foundation to target outcomes at secondary school level, curriculum access and the rollout of an early literacy and language programme which will underpin quality first teaching. So again, and to wrap up, Chairman, to the amendment drafted by Mary Lewis with such good work across the system, we warmly welcome the arrival of our new Executive Director for Children's Services to drive our input to this system-wide focus on making sure no one is left behind, and we home in on economic and health inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Isles. So, Mrs. White, are you minded to accept the amendment?
No, Chairman, I regret that I am not minded to accept it. At some point, I would like to explain why, but presumably you will call me in due course.
I certainly will, and I'm going to throw open the amendment for debate now. And if you'd like to, I'll call you first, Mrs. White, so that you can speak to it now.
That's very kind, Chairman. My argument with the amendment is that so much of it is business as usual, and as such is probably not really necessary. For example, is there any question that under paragraph 6 we're called to support the new executive director? Is there really any question that this council would not support the new director? Of course there isn't. The trouble with the amendment is that it does weaken the original motion in a number of ways, and I will give 2 examples. Paragraph 3 of the original motion has been deleted in the amendment. There really is no point in passing motions on child poverty or anything else for that matter without putting in resources to carry them out. We are in the budget setting season at the moment, so there is no better time than for this council to resolve to make sure that the resources are necessary to deal with the issues of child poverty insofar as the County Council can. And in paragraph 4, the issue of child poverty is never going to be resolved unless the benefit system is reformed and the national minimum wage set at a level where it reflects the real costs of living. Of course, we should ask the government to continue with the funding to mitigate the social effects of COVID-19, but there needs to be a permanent solution to this, not something that merely deals, and please excuse the word merely, only deals with the issues arising from a pandemic, which is why the original motion referred to reforming the welfare system and the fundamental causes of child poverty. That, to me, is where we should be lobbying the government. And can I point out that Surrey County Council is run by Conservatives with a very large majority. The government is run by Conservatives with a large majority. Both levels are actually in a position to really do something about this. Don't kick it into the long grass. Keep doing the good things that are happening at the moment, but please, please, please concentrate on this issue of child poverty. For every child, we only get one shot at dealing with it. Thank you, Chairman.
Robert Evans.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to speak against Mrs. Lewis's amendment because I find it a disingenuous attempt to deflect attention from a real initiative. This motion is calling for support for breakfast clubs, but the amendment deletes the phrase that breakfast clubs make a huge difference to pupil well-being and learning. Mrs. Isles, in her motion, criticised it for being too narrow. Well, to that I would say it's specific, whilst it is actually proposing change. Mrs. Lewis's lengthy amendment talks about assessing, continuing and supporting, which are all very valuable, but they're not talking about actually positive change. And I say, colleagues, having been a head teacher and now a governor of a primary school, I do know the value of breakfast clubs and the huge importance that they play and support for many families and communities. But however, whilst this motion notes the need for capital expenditure, changes to premises, and possible new equipment, it doesn't take account of the ongoing costs of staffing, additional people being required and the costs entailed. So in passing the original unamended motion, I hope it goes without saying we can't just expect existing school staff, teachers, whoever, or to rely on volunteers to take on a huge commitment and ongoing responsibility without the necessary funding. It is going to need an ongoing budget to fund them. But really, if you don't appreciate the full help and support that breakfast clubs play to many, many needy young children and families, then I do urge you to go into schools where they are, where they exist, and to see how they function. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsdale.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to speak in support of the amendment. Mrs. White and other speakers make some really good points calling for action on child food poverty, but they're making short-term suggestions. You know, as a fellow Mancunian, I'm very proud of short-term actions that have taken place as a result of the efforts by Marcus Rashford. But in that original motion, Fiona called the problem a systematic problem, as indeed it is. And a systematic problem requires us to step back, look at it, take a systematic approach and find systematic solutions, long-term solutions, solutions that will help take people out of child poverty for the rest of their lives. To me, I'm afraid a breakfast club in every school is spreading the money very thinly and would be a short-term solution. It's not systematic and it's not targeted at the children that really need that service, or indeed perhaps the schools in the locations that really need those services. A real solution for child food poverty needs more jobs. It needs good jobs that are long term, and that needs a thriving economy. Of course, during COVID, our economy has taken a big knock. We need to be supporting businesses to get back on their feet, to be taking people back into secure employment. So both the businesses and the individuals wanting work need help with things like training. They need refreshment of skills exercises. They need all that kind of support that's ongoing. I don't see that systematic approach in the original proposal. I do see that systematic approach in the amendment. For example, at para 5, where we talk about taking action that will result in new jobs. I also see the arrangements being made for funds to be targeted and to give short-term and immediate help where it's needed in paragraph 9. So, Chairman, let me conclude by saying, please, everyone, support the amendment if you truly want a systematic solutions to child poverty, not just another quick-term fix. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marissa Heath.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Isles very much about the original motion being too narrow in its solutions to this complex issue. There's a great deal of work going on, and it's going to take long-term strategies that we need to work on moving forward, not limited to the County Council, but also wider partners and health. I believe there isn't one member or one officer in this place who doesn't want to solve this problem, and I don't believe we don't all see it as a priority issue either. And of course, nutrition is vitally important, but the problem of child poverty can only be solved by a number of different strategies. Families are all different, and different solutions are needed to help them. What we do know, though, is focusing on early intervention has the most vital role to play in tackling child poverty and breaking the cycle of inequality within families. That's been proven numerous times. So I agree with the wording in the original motion that nobody should be left behind, but where poverty is systemic is when a child even below the age of 4 has already fallen behind and is on the pathway to poor outcomes. And that means a myriad of barriers are in their way to breaking out of poverty in the long run. So for me, where the energy and focus needs to be is through our early years strategy. And we've got our new early years strategy in place now. And the strongest focus on that has got to be on inclusion. We've got to now reach out to those families who haven't come forward or who may not be known to us at this point. That is going to be the key way to really break down those barriers. And we already know that we're going to turn our strategy to how we're going to encourage those children from our most deprived families in Surrey to take up the entitlement to attend an early years setting at 2 years, otherwise known as a FEAT. We have put a sustainability fund to support these early years settings to withstand the impact of COVID. And we've targeted this on the settings serving our populations where we know we have the most disadvantaged families. And so for me, it's that area above all else. It's driving high quality early education and early help services via our early years settings that will support children's development. And it will also support parents to improve their income through work through accessing education and training, which is another area we need to look at. We've got to break down barriers. We've got to enable families to better support themselves. And that, to me, has to be the key thrust of any set of measures tackling child poverty, which the original motion seems to miss. Empowering, supporting, educating, breaking through barriers. So that's why I support the broader amended motion that's been put forward today, because that does that in a more broad way and seeks to actually tackle the systemic problems around this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Stephen Spence.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a slightly different angle for supporting the motion and not the amendment, because Mary's always very hard to resist. She's a very formidable cabinet member, and I've grown quite fond of her in terms of her approach. She's quite right. Her amendment is more systematic, but there's nothing wrong with the motion. And because there's nothing wrong with it, it should be supported, because we don't need to have the blue prism telling us all the time how we can do it better. We've been told several times today, a blue member asking a blue cabinet member who are the bad councils, and the answer is the non-blue councils are the bad councils. A blue cabinet member saying somebody went to ask them for a coffee and probably inadvertently during lockdown. Well, if a mistake was made, work out how to do it properly within the guidelines. Don't give a grumpy lecture about why you wouldn't go for a coffee. And this yellow motion is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. you can accept it, and then the other issues that are in the blue amendment can also be adopted. I mean, one of the hallmarks of Tim Oliver's regime has been a significant change in terms of the cooperation there's been on this council between the various colours. Farnham residents is British Racing Green, just in case you were wondering. So I think, you know, let's forget there's election coming up. Let's not get into this position where we keep being told by the Blues how to do it properly all the time, because the yellows and the greens and the reds all have a bit of an idea as well. Like, we're not daft. So I would say support the motion because there is nothing wrong with that. Commend the very good additional work that Mary's doing and Mary's proposing, and a number of our Blue colleagues are doing, and we will support, such as the cooperation that we've got in Farnham about the board and the infrastructure project, which has been a very good example of cooperation. And let's stop this tendency for those of us of a different hue to be told by the Blues all the time how we can do it better and how we don't need to have a yellow motion supported. The yellow motion is fine. I am going to vote in favour of it. So I'm very sorry, Mary. Even though you're my second favourite Tory after Colin Camp, I'm going to have to oppose you on this occasion.
Thank you very much. I've got 6 more speakers. Jonathan Essex.
Thank you very much, and I'll keep it brief because I would reiterate much of what Stephen Spencer said. Systemic, as opposed to systematic, I think needs focus as well as vision. I think we need to do things on the ground as well as set out where we're going and how all things are connected. I agree with Councillor Marissa Heath that we need to focus on early interventions, but this council has shut many children's centres, formerly called Sure Start centres, across Surrey that did just that. You know, this isn't the same, but it is a different local initiative that could make a difference. Some countries provide free school meals, breakfasts for all children. If we want to get the best out of our young people and maximise the educational potential for everyone, this is a really good initiative that we could lead on in Surrey, and we could put our mark on the map, and maybe the government might listen to Surrey and take it on too. I'll support the main motion.
Thank you. Mr. Mallet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a note of caution and also a suggestion. First of all, I would say I support both the motion and I'm quite willing to support the amendment. I don't want to get into sort of irrelevant sort of nuances as to which might be better or otherwise. Both obviously will serve the purpose. Just a cautionary note on what Mrs. Lewis said and also Mr. Ramsgate. They mentioned a strong economy as the answer. Well, with the current Brexit situation, I'm not sure that we're actually heading that way. But that's obviously isn't part of this motion. But it's just a comment. What really concerns me and has concerned me earlier on in the replies and the information given by cabinet members, and now again on this, is that in Molesey here, we have a food bank. I've been supporting this both personally and from various charities, which I'm responsible for. And it comes across to me that there's a total lack of information on how to proceed with families and others who are really needing help. And earlier on in this meeting today, we've been given phone numbers very quickly. We've been given organisations very quickly. I've tried to write them down. I don't think I've got them correct. That we can put these people and these organisations, particularly the food bank people, onto. So my note or my request via this motion to those in charge would be, can you send out a very quick summary of phone numbers and organisations, partly council organisations or others, through whom people can get access to the sort of help that actually is being raised both in answer to this motion and earlier on in answer to questions, because maybe I'm missing something, but I'll read all the emails and so on. I don't seem to have this information, and I think probably many other members don't. So that's my request, but I'm quite in favour of both the motion and the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, as always, Mr. Mallett, and I'm sure someone will circulate those numbers to all members in due course. I've got 4 more speakers on the amendment to the motion. Just to clarify, this is the amendment to the motion. So proceeding with Tim Hall, please. Tim.
Thank you, Chairman. I should probably set out some of my background in this. I was one of the people who helped found the Leatherhead Food Bank nearly 8 years ago now, which is frightening. And I'm a governor of 2 of our 2 primary schools, both of which have breakfast clubs. However, I think the amendment does actually pick up one of the more important points, and particularly the first paragraph, that including food, fuel, digital, housing and transport poverty, impacting on the whole family. One of the things which I'm very aware of, having worked with our food bank as a volunteer, is that nobody we see ever has a single crisis. That's something which is very striking, and that housing and health and fuel costs are at the bottom of an awful lot of the issues quite often. Secondly, moving on to breakfast clubs. Both my schools, the breakfast club is struggling because with the pandemic, parents are not necessarily in work or are working from home. So actually, they're not taking their children to breakfast club, and they're short of cash. So it is an interesting challenge at the moment. And breakfast clubs only work during school hours, and they really only work for those from 5 upwards, to be honest. So they are part of the patchwork, but they're only part of it. If I take the primary school, which I'm a governor, which covers a fairly deprived Surrey area, I'd like to thank a variety of charities, not all of which I will be able to name, I suspect, including the Food Bank, Stripey Stalk at Reigate, and several others who have provided a mixture of food parcels, children's clothing, and also Christmas parcels, which are being provided for a mixture of people, some of whom are on benefits, some of whom are not, many of whom are new in the system, some of whom have been through the system, and some of whom are struggling forward. There is a long way to go, but I was very impressed with yesterday's seminar, with the amount of information we now hold, and I would commend the Cabinet members to actually engage and keep going, engaging to go forward. I think the amendment is a wider ranging thing. There are many issues, and Ernest Mallett is right, communication and information is key, but we do need to move forward on a more systematic basis, so I will support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Gulati.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the amendment, not because I'm out of sympathy with Fiona's very well-meaning motion, but because I think that by looking at the narrower focus, you're in danger of dissipating the thrust of our efforts overall at the problem. And the problem is the much wider problem of poverty. If you think of a family that does have inadequate resources, they have to take decisions every day as to how they're prioritising what they have between accommodation, power, nutrition, and multiple other issues they have to decide on. And nutrition is poor nutrition for the children is one symptom of the overall problem of poverty. So, in my view, the amendment refocuses our efforts on the wider field and attacks the overall question of poverty, which is where the real problem is. And so I support the amendment rather than changing our focus away from the wider issues to a narrower one.
Thank you, Mr. Gulati. Chris Bottom.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We've heard some quality speeches this morning, and
I think of the best was that of Stephen Spence, who spoke really passionately about the issues that are before us. I would entertain the argument that the amendment strengthens the motion if it didn't delete the things that really are important to make a difference as well. So a strategic approach is fine, but a strategic approach takes time. A strategic approach is not going to solve the problems in January. The Surrey Growth Board won't solve Surrey's economic problems in January. What is important is that the bullet point number 3, for instance, consider setting aside in the next revenue budget sums to enable an action plan falling out of that report, which could meaningfully address the impact of child poverty. What's important is that the data in the community impact assessment, and I agree it's extremely powerful, what are the mechanisms by which we translate that data into actions that make a difference and catch us when we fall? And fourthly, the fourth point, we know in our heart of hearts, notwithstanding the tribe we are a member of, that universal credit is failing vulnerable families. What's wrong with lobbying government to consider the reform of the welfare system? The rest of the amendment is fine, except it's a little self-congratulatory. That's fine. But it's not true to say that the original motion isn't practical, isn't strategic, and isn't sensible. So I would urge members to stick with Mrs. White's original motion because it is practical, it delivers, and it will catch people if they fall.
Thank you, Chris. Just 2 more speakers. Nikki Barton.
Thank you. For some reason, I don't know why my camera's not working, so many apologies. I just wanted to say that my concern is, while there are obviously many elements of the amendment that are commendable and things that surely as a council we should be pursuing and investing huge amounts of effort in, I think Councillor White's original amendment has a real sort of essence of simplicity about it. It's an action, it's something that's achievable in a reasonable time frame. Everybody knows that having a decent breakfast sets you up for the day at school. And I really don't understand why we can't have 2 strands of work. Why can we not all support the principle of the Breakfast Club, something that's, as I said, simple. My concern is that by supporting the amendment, which has got longer term, much broader objectives that we would all probably support as well, you're sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I just really plead that as a council, we stop being political and just really look at what we need to do for our residents. So I fully support the original motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start by saying I sadly missed much of Stephen Spence's speech because I've got a plumbing emergency at home and the plumber turned up just shortly after Stephen started to speak, but I gather it was a very effective contribution. So I may repeat one or 2 things you said, possibly. The thing that 2 brief observations I have actually. The first is that many of the comments from those supporting this amendment seem to be rather patronising, condescending to the original proposers of the motion, which I don't like. And secondly, in Mary's speech, which was in many ways a reasonable speech, she made the usual observation, which we get from government and which you get from Conservatives all the time, that things like this are dependent on a sound economy. We all understand that, actually, but there are certain things that are far more important, actually, than that type of comment, and things like to do with child poverty come in that category. The government, and for that matter, the council, never seems to find problems coming up with money when it's things that they want to do. But when it's really important things like this, like child poverty, we get this little mantra about it's dependent on a sound economy, which again I don't like. So that's my comments, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacLeod. And to wind up on her amendment, Mary Lewis. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this has been nothing if not a colourful speech, with Mr. Spence taking us through the primary colours and Tim Hall talking about the patchwork. And the thing about primary colours is they all stand out individually, but they don't add up to much, whereas the patchwork is about how we hold the whole system together and we support children. And I appreciate many of the things that people have said on both sides of this debate, but I want to just tell you about a couple of initiatives that we've tried in the past that I was involved in and which have failed, because those are the things that make me sure that we need a different approach this time with partners. When I was first a member, we had an initiative with schools, Every Child Matters, well funded, supported with a glossy brochure and well meant, but the attainment gap refused to budge because that was only one part of a big patchwork that needed sorting. A few years later, as Deputy Cabinet Member, I was asked to boost the uptake of free school meals in Surrey schools. And after several months, I discovered that the reason why they weren't claiming with them was that families didn't like to be stigmatised when they were in a small minority of poor families in an affluent school. And these are the kind of experiences, patronising though it may sound to you, Mr MacLeod, they are the experiences that inform what I'm saying in my amendment. They are experiences that show me unless we can get our partners to all work with us on the big issues, we won't make progress. And so I do not think that we should home in on simply doing something about breakfast clubs. We should support a system-wide approach, and there are practical measures with our partners in the amendment, helping families early. That's an initiative with partners, looking at how we can bridge the attainment gap through SAFE, which is our schools improvement partner, looking at the first 1,000 days initiative to make sure that babies get the best start in life. These are all practical things we can do with partners. The amendment is about working together as a system for children, and it doesn't mean that we're not focused on child poverty. We certainly are, but we know that this has to be a system-wide approach. So I urge you all, please, to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lewis. And as one of the final debates in County Hall, that was one of the better ones for sure. So we'll now move to a roll call as to whether to accept the amendment. Over to Vicky.
Thank you, Chairman. So members, you are voting on whether to accept Mrs. Lewis. I will call you to please state for, against or abstain. Mrs. Angel.
For the amendment.
Ms. Azad.
For.
Mrs. Barton.
Abstain.
Mr. Beckett.
Against.
Mr. Beckett.
Was that against, John?
Yes, Tony, against.
Thank you.
Mr. Benson.
For.
Miss Boot.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Botton.
Against.
Mrs. Bowes. Mrs. Bowes. Mrs. Bramble.
For.
Mr. Brett Warburton.
For the amendment.
Mr. Carrasco.
For.
Thank you. Dr. Chapman.
For.
Mrs. Clack.
For.
Mr. Cooksey.
Against.
Mrs. Curran.
For.
Mr. Darby.
Against.
Mr. Deach.
For the amendment.
Mr. Essex.
Against the amendment.
Mr. Robert Evans.
Against.
Mr. Tim Evans.
For.
Mr. Few.
For.
Mr. Forster.
Against.
Mr. Fury.
For the amendment.
Mr. Furness.
For the amendment.
Mr. Gardner.
For the amendment.
Mr. Goodman.
For the amendment.
Mr. Goodwin.
Against.
Thank you. Mrs. Goodwin.
Against.
Miss Griffiths.
For.
Dr. Grant Duff.
For the amendment.
Mr. Galati.
For.
Mr. Hall.
For the amendment.
Mrs. Hammond.
For.
Mr. Harmer.
For.
Mr. Harris.
For the amendment.
Mr. Harrison.
Against.
Mr. Hawkins.
For.
Miss Heath.
For.
Mr. Hussain.
Yeah.
Mr. Hussain.
For the amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Stiles. Mrs. Stiles.
Sorry, it was confused. I'm with the amendment. I think it might help if members mute their microphones when they're not speaking.
Could you say for or against, please?
I'm for the amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Islam. Mr. Islam. Mr. Kemp. Mr. Kemp. No, okay. Mr. Kinkton.
Against.
Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight. Rachel I. Lake. Rachel I. Lake. Mrs. Lay.
For.
Thank you, Mrs. Lay. Mr. Lee.
Against.
Thank you. Mrs. Lewis.
For.
Mr. MacLeod.
Against the amendment.
Mr. McIntosh.
For.
Mr. Mallet.
Against.
Mr. Martin.
For.
Mrs. Mason.
Against the amendment.
Mrs. Mooney.
For the amendment.
Miss Morley.
For.
Mrs. Mosley.
For.
Mrs. Mountain.
For.
Mrs. Muir.
For.
Mr. Newty.
For.
Mr. Oliver.
For.
Mr. O'Reilly.
For.
Dr. Povey.
For.
Mr. Ramsdale.
For.
Mrs. Rivers.
Against the amendment.
Mrs. Rush.
For.
Mr. Samuels.
For.
Mr. Spence.
Against the amendment.
Mrs. Steeds.
For.
Dr. Santo.
For.
Mr. Taylor.
For.
Mr. Thompson.
For.
Thank you. Mrs. Thorne.
For.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Against.
Miss Turner Stewart.
For.
Mr. Walsh.
For.
Mrs. Watson.
Against.
Mrs. White.
Against.
Mr. Whitton.
For.
And Mrs. Young.
4.
Chairman, my apologies. It's Councillor Rachel Lake. I lost my sound for a while, so I was unable to vote. May I vote at the end of this now?
Yes, for or against, Rachel?
For the amendment.
For the.
Thank you.
Chairman, it's Councillor Islam here. I lost my voice as well. Can I vote for the amendments, please?
Sorry, we couldn't hear you. Who are you?
Councillor Naz Islam.
Oh, love. For, against, or abstain?
For, please.
Thank you. Anyone else from any side? Thank you, members. So we have 54 in favour, 20 against, and 1 abstention. So the amendment becomes the substantive motion. So can we move straight to the vote unless anyone wishes to speak again? Thank you. I hand over to Vicky once again. Before Vicky does it, is there anyone who dissents? Thank you. Vicky, will you take the call? Can we vote verbally on this in the circumstances? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Against. Against.
Oh, against.
Agreed.
Then we take the roll call.
There was 1 against.
1 against. I'm sorry. Against, are you? We'll do a roll call. I don't want there to be any doubt on this. Vicky, over to you.
Okay, so members, you are voting to approve now a substantive motion, which was originally an amendment. I will call members in turn. If you could please state for, against, abstain. Start with Mrs. Angel.
For.
Miss Azad.
For.
Mrs. Barton.
Abstain.
Mr. Beckett.
Abstain.
Mr. Benison. Mr. Benison. Miss Boot. Miss Boot. Mr. Bottom.
For.
Mrs. Bowes. Mrs. Bowes. Mrs. Bramble.
For.
Mr. Brett Warburton.
For.
Mr. Carrasco.
For.
Dr. Chapman.
For.
Mrs. Pack.
For.
Mr. Cooksey.
For.
Mrs. Curran.
For.
Mr. Darby.
Abstain.
Mr. Deach.
For.
Mr. Essex.
For.
Mr. Robert Evans.
With reservations, for.
Mr. Tim Evans.
With no reservations, for.
Mr. Pugh.
For.
Mr. Forster.
For.
Mr. Fury.
For.
Mr. Furness.
For.
Mr. Gardner.
For.
Mr. Goodman. Mr. Goodman?
4.
Mr. Goodwin?
4.
Mrs. Goodwin?
4.
Mrs. Griffiths?
4.
Dr. Grogduff?
4.
Mr. Glarty?
4.
Mr. Hall?
4.
Mrs. Hammond?
4.
Mr. Harmer?
4.
Mr. Harris?
4.
Mr. Harrison?
4.
Mr. Hawkins?
4.
Ms. Heath?
4.
Mr. Hussain?
4.
Mrs. Isles?
4.
Mr. Islam?
4.
Mr. Kemp? Mr. Kinkton? Mr. Kinkton?
4.
Thank you. Mr. Knight? Rachel I. Lake?
4.
Mrs. Lay?
4.
Mr. Lee?
4.
Mrs. Lewis?
4.
Mr. MacLeod? Mr. MacLeod?
Mr. MacLeod?
Mr. McIntosh?
4.
Mr. Mallet?
4.
Mr. Martin?
4.
Mrs. Mason?
4.
Mrs. Mooney?
4.
Miss Morley?
4.
Mrs. Mosley?
4.
Mrs. Mountain?
4.
Mrs. Muir?
4.
Mr. Newty?
4.
Mr. Oliver?
4.
Mr. O'Reilly?
4.
Dr. Povey?
4.
Mr. Ramsdale?
4.
Mrs. Rivers?
4.
Mrs. Rush?
4.
Mr. Samuels?
4.
Mr. Spence?
4.
Mrs. Steeds?
4.
Dr. Santo?
4.
Mr. Taylor?
4.
Miss Thompson?
4.
Mrs. Thorne?
4.
Mr. Townsend?
Abstain.
Miss Turner-Stewart?
4.
Mr. Walsh?
4.
Mrs. Watson?
4.
Mrs. White?
4.
Mr. Whittam?
4.
Mrs. Young?
4.
Miss Boot? Did you want
Yes,
to?
yes, sorry, I'm 4. I was having some technical problems with my sound. Thank you.
What about Mr. MacLeod?
Mr. MacLeod?
Sorry, I had the problem as well. I'm 4 as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. MacLeod. So the result is 71 for, none against, and 4 abstentions. So the motion is carried. Thank you, members. Moving to item 9, the Organisation Strategy 2021-26, page 45 of the agenda. I call the Leader of the Council to introduce the report. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hopefully is self-explanatory, but just to raise or to highlight a few points. I mean, this paper builds on our 2030 community vision, which, as all members will know, is about ensuring that no one is left behind and that we tackle inequalities, both health and other inequalities across the county. COVID-19 has taught us a lot about our communities and the disproportionate impact that it's had on those communities. And there's been mention already of the work that has been carried out on the community impact assessment, and I would encourage every member to read that and to look at their own particular communities. We also have the work of the Economic Commission that has looked at the state of the Surrey economy and indeed the things that we need to do to support it going forward. There are 4 key pillars to this slightly revised organisation strategy. I've already mentioned those previously: the growing the sustainable economy, tackling health inequality, enabling a greener future, and empowering communities. And there's more detail about each of those areas contained within the paper. There are 6 then enablers that sit under that, which I won't go through, Mr. Chairman. It's I believe, a thorough and really helpful piece of work just to put a framework around all of the things, all of the initiatives and work streams that we're pursuing across the county and seeking to address not just the impacts of COVID-19, but the wider issues that we know that already exist in the county. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to propose the adoption of that organisation strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader. And in the absence of any questions online, the recommendation is on page 51 of the agenda and is the Council is asked to approve the Surrey County Council Organisation Strategy 21-26 Annex A, which sets out how the Council will work with residents and partners to contribute to the achievement of the community vision for Surrey in 2030. It sets out priority areas the Council will focus on over the next 5 years. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
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 Chairman, I did have my hand up, and I would like to address the council.
I will let you, Mr. Darby. We've had a long time for you to put your hand up. It didn't appear, but I will allow.
Thank you. With the greatest respect, Mr. Chairman, I did put my hand up straight away. It is still up. Nonetheless, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Much of what is said, in fact, pretty much all of what is said in the various documents before us are commendable, indeed very much commendable. Most of what is said inevitably is aspirational, and the community impact assessment, the comprehensive assessment, is an excellent piece of work. I'm delighted that we see reference to mental health so frequently. But I do have a dilemma overall in relation to what is said. We talk a lot about efficiencies, whether it's 200 million reference one in one area, 86 million in another, driving efficiencies. Are we talking about real efficiencies for where we weren't doing things very well and we're getting better so that the resident experience is better? Or are we looking at cuts? Whatever we want value for money. There is a reference in the preamble to government funding falling short. I think that is probably right. We've heard from the leader say earlier this morning, unless I'm much mistaken, that wasn't the case. We've got reference there to growing demand for special educational needs service. Chris Botton has mentioned that. I agree with him. There's a reference to affordable housing. I'm not convinced that the government's intended planning reforms and consultation cover that properly at all. I'd be interested to see what actions we at Surrey are taking there and when. There's an excellent reference to homelessness and rough sleeping. Government funding has been provided further for that. There's one, I think, error in the report. There's a reference to a commitment to planting 1.2 million trees. If I understood Natalie Bramble's statements previously, I think it's to facilitate, not to plant.
There's a reference to major reforms to children's services, to adult social care and fire service. Yes, that's correct, but we start from a very low base, effectively, with failing services. There's a reference to maintaining Surrey's highway network. Absolutely right. We didn't start again from a very high position. A reference to community facilities in relation to infrastructure. I simply note that community centres in most cases disappeared. Youth offer and centres also disappeared. Our group has made various references to that over the last couple of years, and also to delivering together. Again, I commend that. And with that whistle-stop tour through the report, I again note aspirational intentions, very much welcome those, and I look forward over the next 6 months, year, to seeing all of this coming forward so that we make a real difference within Surrey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. So can we confirm the vote that we agree this paper, please?
Agreed.
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 Thank you, Council. Item 10, adoption of the Surrey Waste Local Plan, page 91 of the agenda. I call the leader again to introduce the report. Over to you, leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was in fact going to just make a couple of comments following Nick Darby, but I'll leave that to another time. Safe to say that this council is absolutely focused on transforming the way in which its services are delivered and measuring the outcomes. And the community impact assessment will provide a very effective evidence base against which people will be able to measure those improved outcomes. These aren't aspirational, they're not just meaningless sort of ambitions. They are absolutely about things that we're doing and will continue to do. Mr. Chairman, in relation to item 10 on the agenda, the adoption of the Surrey Waste Local Plan, before I propose that this council adopt it, could I ask Natalie Bramwell, as the Cabinet Member for the Environment and Climate Strategy, to just provide a little bit more background information.
Mrs. Bramwell, do go ahead, please.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Chairman. Members, in order to ensure that there is sufficient capacity, the Council has a statutory requirement to produce local plans for minerals and waste and to review and update these plans where necessary every 5 years. The Surrey Waste Plan was adopted in 2008 and is therefore now 12 years out of date. If Council did not adopt the plan, it would be increasingly difficult to defend planning decisions and enforcement action taken on the basis of the policies in the existing plan, potentially resulting in unwanted speculative waste development and the regularisation of unauthorised waste activity. The review of the waste plan commenced in 2016 and we are now at the end of the process. The plan with modifications was found sound by an independent planning inspector in May 2020, following an examination in public in September 2019. The plan meets all statutory requirements and is now ready to be adopted by this council. The new Waste Local Plan has fewer allocated sites than the existing plan. Some have been removed completely. There is only one new site at Lambs Business Park in South Godstone. The remaining sites are all allocated in the current plan. Trump's Farm is now allocated solely for a dry mixed recycling plant, and Wayland's Treatment Works has additional protections for residents in respect of HGV routing that are absent from the current plan. There are a number of existing industrial estates referred to in the plan as industrial land areas of search, identified as potential sites for waste development. These are not allocated sites, but may be suitable for small to medium scale waste uses, subject to planning permission in the usual way. Several of them already host a range of waste uses. There has been 4 rounds of public consultation where views on the plan were sought from residents, businesses and other stakeholders at various stages of its evolution, with consultation on issues and options from September to November 2016. The draft plan from November 2017 to February 2018, the submission plan from January to February 2019, and the main modifications in January and February of this year. Members have been engaged throughout the process by reports and updates to Cabinet, Select Committee and planning and regulatory committees, meetings of the member reference group, and to an all-member briefing during the submission plan consultation. District and borough officers and members were engaged through a round of workshops in 2018 and 2019. A statement of common ground was signed between the County Council and all 11 boroughs and districts in September 2019. Looking to the future, the Council is progressing a joint minerals and waste local plan to address the increasing synergies between the two. Many other county councils have joint plans, and we expect to go out to consultation on this joint plan in the summer of next year. However, it is important that in the interim, this plan is adopted to ensure that the waste planning policies used to determine planning applications are as up to date as they can be. Chairman, Leader, I therefore commend this report to the Council to adopt the Surrey Waste Local Plan as set out in Annexes 1 and 2 to the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Bramwell. I have a couple of speakers before the Leader comes back if he wishes. Rachel Lake.
Thank you, Chairman, very much. First of all, I'd like to say and thank the portfolio holder for all of her attention, support and the confidence that she's given me within the Surrey Waste Plan. And I say confidence because Waylands actually sits within my own division. Waylands has been a difficult site from its very conception, where both councils took the owners many years ago to court and we were unsuccessful. It has a clwyd and it has developed from that clwyd. Now, in our waste plan, we have accepted it as one of our top sites where it may develop quite considerably. And when it came under review, Mrs. Bramwell did say that there is a scheme to help with the heavy goods vehicle, which is diverting them down new roads. We know we live in the real world and this will not happen. So a site that has no infrastructure whatsoever will never actually expand to what we require. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I would like to raise my objection specifically to this part of the plan and have it noted, and that I look forward to an integrated waste and minerals plan with our Surrey plan for the whole thing. I think that will be far superior to what we have with two individual plans. I'm grateful. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mrs. Lake. Mike Goodman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and I will be brief because Natalie certainly covered all the ground I was going to possibly talk about. As members will know, I was a portfolio holder in 2016 when this plan first came to start the process. I could not believe here we are now, nearly 5 years later, we've actually got the plan being agreed. What I'd like to do today, though, is really thank those officers, and particularly Catherine Semington, who actually left Surrey in Australia last year, and Paul Sanderson, who worked for the council for over 30 years. And he was persuaded to delay his retirement till the plan was completed in July of this year. And they do deserve great credit, as do the whole team who worked so hard in this very complicated and very challenging plan. I also would pay tribute to all the many members that contributed to this plan and the districts and boroughs. This has been an important plan to achieve and will in time help our climate change strategy. And I support the plan in front of the members today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Peter Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I was the portfolio holder who took through the 2008 waste plan, way back in the time when we had Roger Hargreaves, who was the senior officer in charge at the time. I know just how difficult it is to create such a plan and take it through all the consultation procedures and then bring it to council and indeed to go through the external assessment and so on and so forth. So could I just commend the plan to the council? It's a very sound plan and I will be very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, John O'Reilly.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman, and very briefly indeed.
My Hersham constituents, I think, would expect me, I say very briefly, to endorse everything that Councillor Mrs. Lake has just said, given that my streets in Hersham tend to be also one of the access routes to the Waylands proposal. And I'd also like to heartfelt thanks to Natalie Bramhill. She has been extraordinarily solicitous in listening to the concerns that I know Rachel and I, and no doubt others, have made to her. And I'd like to put it on record my thanks to Mrs. Bramhill for that. And like Mrs. Lake, I do hope, given the undoubted failings as a site of Waylands, that somehow, hopefully, this dilemma that we all face can be addressed, as Mrs. Bramhill has said, by incorporating the waste strategy, which we're about to endorse, with that relating to minerals. I hope as the months go ahead that a satisfactory outcome will eventuate from that. But in the meantime, again, many thanks to Mrs. Bramhill, and with that, I will also be supporting the strategy. Thank you.
Indeed, Mr. O'Reilly, Mrs. Lake as well for your encouraging remarks. Mr. Leader or Mrs. Bramhill, do you want to come back on anything?
No, thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you. So the recommendation is on page 93 of your agenda, and is that the Council is asked to adopt the Surrey Waste Local Plan. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Mr. Chairman, could I register an abstention?
Agreed.
Please. I abstain from the vote.
Yes, you may. Is there anyone else out there? Otherwise, we'll have to have a recorded vote. Is there anyone else that wants to say anything, or is that it? Thank you. So that's it. Your thing is noted, Mrs. Lake. We are agreed. Oh. Thank you. Item 11, the Scrutiny Annual Report 2019-20 on page 261 of the agenda. I call Tim Oliver, Leader of the Council, to introduce the report. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I commend the work of the select committees and the task and finish groups who have worked immensely hard this past year, and I think have met over 100 times during the course of the year, and to thank the officers for the support that they've given to the select committees. I believe that the restructuring of the select committees and the establishment of those task and finish groups has been really effective in scrutinising council policy before it reaches cabinet, and indeed adds real value to the democratic process. Can I perhaps encourage those members that have lectured us this morning on partisan politics to use the select committee process to promote sensible proposals for this council to consider. Having said that, I am very proud of the work that the select committees have done, and I'm very grateful for their constructive input and into the formulation of council policy. So I'm very pleased to support this report, and I think Chris Bolton, as chair of the chairs of the select committees, will add a few comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I've asked Chris to, as chairman of the select committee's chairman's group, to say a few words. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity, and thank you, Leader, for the work that you've done to support the development of scrutiny initiated by Mr. O'Reilly and the work of the task groups and of officers to support them has been superb. I'd also like to thank my fellow chairs and vice chairs for the support they've given me in the coordinating group, the meetings of which have always been constructive and helpful. Clearly, there's always further work to do, and I support the leader's call for more members to be engaged, particularly in task groups. But I think we've made a significant way forward, and I'm hugely grateful that this work has been undertaken. Scrutiny is the foundation of all our democracy, and I'm delighted that the Council has taken on board these advances, and I would like to express the sincere hope that they continue into the next civic year and beyond, because I don't think we should lose the opportunities and insights which scrutiny has given us. So thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Botman. Finally, Mr. O'Reilly. You're on mute, John.
not usually the case. I will start again. As Tim Oliver and Chris Botton have just said, this is an item which will command, I hope, unanimity and bipartisanship, and that has been, as Chris Botton said, the feature of the select committees since they were revitalised. Only 2 points I would make, Chairman. We can set up the structures, and the structures can help, and pre-meetings can certainly help. But what really matters, what is defining whether we make success or not, are indeed the members, us, trying to do our role. And I think one of the real advantages of the new system, and again, Chris Botton and Tim Oliver deserve great credit for this, is that all parties now, resident associations, Liberal Democrats and Conservatives, all occupy chairs and vice chairs, unlike usually under the previous system. And I think that brings us together, because we do, at least in my experience, leave our party labels. When we go into select committee, we work as members, trying to hold the executive to account in the best way that we possibly can. And, I think by and large, as Chris Botton has just said, there's still work to do. But I hope colleagues will agree that we have made significant progress. And as we go into the new council, or whoever is elected in May, we'll take that further. And my final point, and again, also great credit to Tim Oliver. I think, and we just touched on it earlier in the meeting, is that by and large, I think, overwhelmingly, the leader of the council, when he first took office, said that no significant proposals would come to cabinet unless they had been through the select committee system. And I think overwhelmingly that promise has been endorsed, has been actually met, and essentially the results of that are being proven. And that can be seen in the graph where it says in the table select committee activity. 2 or 3 years ago, when we last committed a select committee report, overwhelmingly the activities of select committees, some good, some not so good, were noting actions and asking for updates periodically. Now the change has been fundamental. If you look, the top one is the scrutiny of strategy, policy development, the establishment of task groups, as Chris Botton has mentioned. So we're on a good journey, I think, collectively, all of us members who are not in the cabinet, holding the cabinet to account. They have, I think, made their commitment to the system work. So, we can't be too self-congratulatory, but I think hopefully the last 18, 19 months under the new system has proven its worth. And most important of all, it's improved the governance of this council to the benefit of all our residents in Surrey. Thank you.
Thanks to the inimitable John Riley. And the recommendation is on page 261 of your agenda, and is for council to note the contents of the scrutiny annual report. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed, council. Item 12, Audit and Governance Committee, report of the Governance Review Task Group on page 275 of the agenda. I call David Harmer, Chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee, to introduce the report. David.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess after the remarks on the previous...
Weight Watchers, biscuits and treats, for example, I'm unfortunately very familiar with that category.
Shall I start again? That seems to have gone away. Okay. After the previous item, I guess the overall summary is somewhat superfluous because we took a very open approach to our interviewing of people, as you can see, from various aspects of the council, to avoid leading them, because we suspected that there would be considerable support. The summary, therefore, is very significant progress. So far, so good. It can get better still. So let's not just rest on our laurels from a scrutiny point of view. But overall, excellent, strong support from the leader of the council and the other, just not support, strong support from the leader of the council and the other group leaders, and also from the chief executive. And we did set out not to lead those conversations. We made them quite open before we asked some specific questions. So two comments overall. One, that the scrutiny is now clearly, since Mr. O'Reilly's original speech at council a couple of years ago, is now valued much more by officers generally than it had been previously, and by members, of course, because they've realised that they now have non-cabinet members now realise that they have a significant opportunity to direct what the council does before the cabinet decides what's practically doable in some cases. One recommendation was that there should be, which is in there, that it should be a standing item at county council for select committee chairmen, like cabinet members, to report and take questions. And I would really urge council to agree to that. Apart from that, I hope you found it comforting. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, David. The recommendation is on page 275 of your agenda, and is that council is asked to note the report by the Audit and Governance Committee of 26 November 2020. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. Item 30. Back to David, the Audit and Governance Committee report of the Member Code of Conduct Working Group, page 291 of the agenda. David, over to you.
Yes, well, this is to some extent an interim position because the Local Government Association is expected to publish its revised Code of Conduct recommendations in the near future. But we felt that when we started looking at this, that wasn't the case. We didn't know when they were going to do the next review. And so these were the findings. And when we knew that they were going to do that review, we thought we should stick with where we had got to make sure that we were in a position to deal with matters. I was going to say professionally, but that's not our side of the council, is it? But you know what I mean. To proceed. So we would anticipate that we may want to bring forward some minor amendments when we have seen the revised version of the Local Government Association's recommendations. But as things stand, I recommend at the report here to the council.
Recommendations are on page 291 of the agenda, and are that council is asked to approve the following recommendations by the Ordinance and Governance Committee: the appointment of 2 independent persons, that Mr Akbar Khan and Philippa Harding be appointed as the 2 independent persons. I had the pleasure of interviewing them along with Mr Townsend and Mrs Watson, and they're excellent. And the revised arrangements for dealing with allegations of breaches of the Member Code of Conduct. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Chairman.
Agreed.
Mr Cook is sharing his screen.
Yes, we're dealing with that. Thank you. Mr Cook, he could remove his screen. Grateful. And moving to item 14, the report of the Cabinet on page 305 of the agenda. I call the Leader of the Council to present the reports of the meetings of the Cabinet held on 27th October and 24th November 2020. Leader.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I beg to move the report of Cabinet of the 27th of October and 24th of November 2020.
I'll call the paragraphs A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So Cabinet recommends that the County Council notes that there have been no urgent decisions in the last 3 months. The motion is that the report of the meetings of the Cabinet held on 27th October and 24th November 2020 be adopted. Are we agreed, Council?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. And now turning to item 15, minutes of Cabinet meetings, page 315 of the agenda, I turn to the final item of the agenda, and no notification of questions on the minutes has been received. Colleagues, We celebrated V and VJ Day this year on the anniversary of the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in 1945. Who would have thought that we'd celebrate V-Day today in 2020 as well? And as for the 975 vaccine shots being available in Surrey today, I'm attending my first soccer game of this year tonight, and I hope the shots of Aldershot have as many shots as that too. Because now I can make some remarks that are a little bit lighter. Ladies and gentlemen, as I bring this final meeting of the Council to a close, before we say goodbye to each other, I just want to say another farewell, and a very fond one, to where I am in County Hall today. As most of you are all aware, this is our last Council meeting to be hosted at County Hall, and we're closing the doors of this magnificent building for the final time on the 31st of December. And we will start the new year in our new home at Woodhatch Place in Reigate. County Hall has been Surrey County Council's home since 1893, nearly 130 years. And I've been privileged to be a councillor on and off for over 27 years. And it's such an honour to be the last serving chairman in this truly wonderful building, and hopefully the first serving chairman in our wonderful new Woodhatch Place in Reigate. I came across a lovely quote which I think sums up not just our farewell to County Hall, but also this past year and how we look forward to the future. And the quote is, "Every goodbye always makes the next hello closer." And whilst we may be very sad, as I am, to leave County Hall, I'm quite sure that not many of us will be sad to say goodbye to 2020. What a year it's been. And we look forward to saying hello to 2021 and moving to our new home in the heart of our county. And I certainly look forward to welcoming in the new year, which I'm sure we all hope will be so different to the last. And whilst we don't want to have any false hope, the forecast is certainly looking better for the year ahead. So farewell, County Hall. Yes, I'm emotional about it. Farewell. And thank you so much for what you've done and where you've been and how you will be missed. And finally, I miss Christmas, everybody. And so I wish you all a healthy and happy one, and see you all in 2021. Cheerio.
Happy Christmas, Tony.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.